What's up, guys? Welcome to Watch Harry. We've got something special today. Petunia activated James Potter's war protocols and Dumbledore lost 14 ancient protections in one night. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The seal. The letter had been in the attic for 13 years. Petunia Dursley knew it was there. Had always known. She'd put it there herself, on the morning of November 2, 1981, still wearing her dressing gown, her hands shaking so badly she'd dropped it twice on the stairs. She'd shoved it behind the broken headboard of Vernon's old university bed frame, under a box of Dudley's baby clothes that had never quite fit right, and she had not gone back for it. Not once. Not in 13 years. She told herself it was because she was busy. Then she told herself it was because she didn't care. Then she stopped telling herself anything about it and just quietly organized her life around the fact that there was a letter in the attic that she was never going to read. July 31, 1994, and Petunia Dursley was in the attic at 2 in the morning because she couldn't sleep. She hadn't been able to sleep for 3 nights running, ever since the incident at the school. Harry's teacher had sent home a note about unusual disturbances in the science lab and several pieces of equipment that appeared to have been repaired spontaneously, and Petunia had read that note standing over the kitchen sink and felt something cold move through her chest. The same cold that had moved through her at 11 years old when she'd watched Lily make a flower open and close just by thinking at it. The same cold that lived in her stomach every time she looked at Harry, which was why she tried, mostly, not to look at Harry at all. She'd come up to the attic looking for the winter blankets. That was the official reason. The summer had turned strange and cool and Dudley had been complaining, and getting Dudley's blankets out at 11 o'clock at night was exactly the sort of productive task that could prevent a person from lying awake thinking about cold feelings in their chest. The box she was looking for was behind the old bed frame. She saw the edge of it, blue storage box, white lid, Dudley's name in black marker, and reached for it, and her fingers found the letter instead. 13 years. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly yellowed at the corners. Her name was on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. Not Lily's. Lily's handwriting was round and slanted slightly left, familiar as her own face. This was different, sharp, quick strokes, the letters a little uneven, like whoever had written it was in a hurry. Petunia Evans Dursley, it said. Her full name. The maiden name she'd buried. She sat down on the attic floor in the dark, among Dudley's outgrown toys and Vernon's old cricket equipment, and she turned the letter over. It was sealed with wax, deep red, pressed with a crest she didn't recognize. A stag. Her hands were shaking again, the same way they'd shaken on the stairs in 1981. She opened it. Dear Petunia, you don't know me very well, and I suspect you've made up your mind about me already, so I'll be honest with you from the start. I don't have much time, and I don't have the patience for a long preamble. My name is James Potter. I'm your sister's husband. I'm writing this letter because I think we might both be dead soon, and there are things I need to say to someone who isn't a wizard. First, she loves you. I know that's not what you think. I know you've told yourself something different. I've watched Lily carry the weight of your silence for 7 years and I understand why you gave it to her, even if I've spent most of those 7 years being furious about it. But she loves you. She talks about you when she thinks I'm asleep. She kept every letter you sent her from primary school in a box under our bed, and when she thinks about home, it's you she means. Not your parents, God rest them. You. I thought you should know that. In case she never gets the chance to say it herself. Second, I need to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I am not asking casually. I've been a soldier for 3 years. I don't ask for things casually anymore. If something happens to us, if Lily and I don't make it, our son Harry will be left in the world without us. Dumbledore will want to send him to you. I imagine he'll make it sound very official and very final, the way he makes everything sound very official and very final. He'll tell you there are protective enchantments. He'll tell you it's the safest option. He's probably right about the enchantments. He's not always right about the other things. I need to ask you to love my son. Not perfectly. Not without difficulty. I know you and Lily never resolved what was between you, and I know magic frightens you. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand why, because I do understand. I've read your letters, I know what it was like for you, but I need to ask anyway, because Harry deserves someone who loves him, and in the whole world, the only other person Lily trusted with everything was you. Here is what I need you to do. Only if you want to. Only if, at some point in the years to come, you can look at my son and feel something that isn't fear or resentment. There is a coin in this envelope. You'll find it when you reach the bottom of the page. It's gold, heavier than it looks, and it has a stag on one side and a doe on the other. Lily and I made it together on our wedding night. It took us 4 hours and we argued about the charms the whole time, and it was one of the best nights of my life. The coin is connected to a set of protocols. You don't need to know what that means exactly. Think of them as my last instructions, for emergencies only, the kind of thing a soldier sets up because he knows better than to assume he'll survive the war. The protocols are sealed. They'll stay sealed unless someone who shares blood with Lily performs a very specific action. You just have to give the coin to Harry. That's all. Hold it in both hands. Think of your sister, not the sister you lost, but the sister you remember from before all of this, the girl from Cokeworth, and set the coin on the floor in front of him while he's sleeping. If you can do that, Petunia, if you can find it in you to do that one thing, I promise you that everything I've prepared will work the way it's supposed to. Harry will be safe. Not the way Dumbledore means safe. Actually safe. With everything he needs. If you can't, I understand. You're being asked to take an awful lot on faith from a man you've never met. I would have trouble with that too. But if you ever, in any moment, on any night, look at my son and feel something that is not fear, then that's the moment. That's when you do it. Take care of yourself, Petunia. I mean that. James Potter P.S. He has Lily's eyes, doesn't he? I was hoping he would. She always said they were her best feature and I always said she was wrong, but I wanted her to have that one. The attic was very quiet. Petunia sat on the floor with the letter in her lap and did not move for a long time. Outside, a car passed on Privet Drive. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. The house was completely ordinary and she was sitting in it with her sister's handwriting in her chest and a gold coin in her palm, heavier than it looked, stag on one side and a doe on the other. She'd hated James Potter. Or she'd told herself she had. It had been easier than the alternative, which was looking at the young man who'd had the audacity to love Lily back with everything he had, when Petunia herself had been too afraid for too long to do it properly. He was everything she wasn't, loud and bright and recklessly alive, and she'd looked at him and Lily together and felt something so ugly and complicated that she'd called it hatred and moved on. This letter was not written by a man she could hate. She turned the coin over. Stag. Doe. Stag. Doe. If you ever look at my son and feel something that is not fear. She thought about Harry at breakfast. The way he sat very still, with his shoulders slightly rounded, not because he was sulking, she understood now, but because he'd learned that taking up less space meant fewer problems. She thought about the morning she'd caught him reading one of Dudley's discarded books at 5 in the morning, already awake, quiet as a small animal, and how quickly he'd put it down when he saw her. She thought about the science lab note from the school, about Lily making a flower open and close, about the morning in November 1981 when she'd found a baby on her doorstep with Dumbledore's letter pinned to his blanket, and she'd stood there in the cold with an infant in her arms and felt absolutely nothing because feeling something would have broken her completely. She thought about the girl from Cokeworth. Her sister with her bright red hair and her laugh that was too loud for indoor spaces, who used to slip her hand into Petunia's at the cinema even when they were teenagers and it wasn't cool anymore, who had called her Toonie and meant it like an endearment even though Petunia had always pretended to find it irritating. She'd missed Lily for 13 years. She had missed her every single day in the same quiet suffocating way she did everything, without saying so, without letting it show, without giving it any air. Petunia Dursley stood up. She brushed the dust off her dressing gown. She tucked the letter into her pocket and she carried the coin downstairs and she stood outside the cupboard under the stairs for a very long time. Then she opened the door. Harry was asleep on his narrow cot, one arm thrown over his face, his glasses folded on the small shelf above his head. He was 14 years old today, she had not forgotten, she'd just decided early on that acknowledging it made things harder, and he was small for his age, dark-haired, and he slept with the careful stillness of someone who'd learned not to thrash around in a space this size. He had Lily's eyes. Even closed, with those ridiculous round glasses folded away, she could see it in the architecture of his face. The slight tilt. She'd been looking away from it for 13 years. If you ever look at my son and feel something that is not fear. She felt something that was not fear. She thought of her sister. Not the sister she'd lost, the sister she remembered. Lily at 8, at 10, at 13, at 21 in a photograph she'd somehow never received but had seen once by accident in a box of things from the solicitor. Lily laughing. Lily with her too loud laugh and her flower that opened and closed. Petunia set the coin on the floor in front of the cot. The moment it touched the floorboard, the gold deepened. Not a glow, not a flash, just a deepening, like a note held on an instrument until the room begins to resonate with it. The coin sat on the floor and hummed, and Petunia felt it in the soles of her feet through the thin cotton of her slippers. Then the coin went dark. And 14 separate things in the world stopped existing all at once. Albus Dumbledore was not asleep. He rarely was, these days. He sat in his office at Hogwarts with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, reviewing correspondence by wand light. Fawkes was sleeping on his perch, head tucked under his wing. The portraits of former headmasters dozed in their frames. It was 2:17 in the morning and Albus was reading a report from one of his sources in Eastern Europe about the movements of something that should not be moving, and he was allowing himself to worry about it in the quiet way he worried about most things, carefully, systematically, alone. He felt the first ward break like a physical blow. He was on his feet before he'd registered the sensation properly, his wand in his hand and the tea scattered across the desk. The ward hadn't broken, exactly, it had dissolved, from the inside out, and that was something he had not thought was possible. He'd woven that enchantment himself. He'd spent 6 days on it. It was anchored in, the second one broke. Fawkes jerked awake with a startled cry. The third and the fourth went together, a paired resonance that he recognized too late as a counter-sequence, something specifically designed to unravel tandem protections. Which meant someone knew the structure of his enchantments, knew they came in pairs, had built a countermeasure against them before they were even, 5. 6. 7. No. He said it aloud, to the empty office, his voice very level. His hands were not level. He pressed them flat against the desk. The portraits were stirring now, ancient headmasters in nightcaps peering blearily from their frames, and he paid them no attention because 8 and 9 had just broken simultaneously and he was doing the arithmetic in his head and it was telling him something that couldn't be right. Godric's hollow origin. All of them. The anchor point for all 14 enchantments, which were not, as he'd arranged it in his own mind, security wards, they were suppressive structures. He'd told himself for 14 years that there was a difference. That restraining an uncontrolled magical inheritance was different from suppression. That preventing a traumatized child from accessing abilities he wasn't ready for was different from 10. 11. Fawkes took flight, looping the office in agitation, his tail trailing sparks. Albus stood very still and felt the next one go, felt it specifically, felt the shape of its dissolution, because he'd built this one with greater care than the others. This one had been the most important one and he'd designed it so that it could only be broken by a direct blood relation performing a voluntary act of genuine, 12. 13. He sat down heavily in his chair. He was a man who had been playing complex games for a very long time, and he was very good at it, and part of being good at it was the ability to recognize the moment when the board had changed. Not shifted. Changed. When the game you'd prepared for was no longer the game being played. The 14th ward broke quietly. Like a door closing. And somewhere in a cupboard on Privet Drive, Harry Potter opened his eyes. Harry opened his eyes and lay still for 20 seconds, because he'd learned that there was no point getting up before 6 because the kitchen was Vernon's domain until 7 and the bathroom was Dudley's domain until 8 and the whole house was generally hostile until the daily routines were well established and he'd long since learned to map himself around everyone else's patterns like water. Then he noticed that something was different. Not the cupboard. The cupboard was the same cot, same shelf, same faint smell of damp wood and cleaning products. Same narrow dark. Same distant sound of Vernon snoring through 2 floors of house. He was different. It wasn't pain. It wasn't a flash or a bang or a rush. It was more like, he'd been reading a map in terrible light for years, straining to make out the details, and someone had just turned on the lights. The map was the same map. He was the same person. But he could suddenly see everything on it with absolute clarity. He knew things. He lay in the dark and took stock of this in the careful methodical way he'd developed over years of living in an environment where panicking was not useful. He knew things. Facts about magic, not the facts from Hogwarts textbooks, not Hermione's annotated notes or Ron's second-hand explanations, but something layered and deep, like memories he'd never lived but somehow owned. Theory and practice and the particular way his magic worked, its shape and character and range, the spells he'd been doing accidentally since childhood suddenly legible to him as deliberate actions. He knew what he'd done in the science lab. He knew exactly how he'd done it. He knew about his father. Not just the basic shape of it, James Potter, dead at 21, Gryffindor, popular, Lily's husband. He knew James. The tactical logic his father had used during the First War, the way he'd thought about magical combat, not as a series of spells but as a conversation, a negotiation, a problem to be solved by whoever was willing to think 3 steps ahead. The war vault at Gringotts. The protocols he'd designed. The legal work he'd done with goblin law specialists in the months before Godric's Hollow, the kind of preparation that only made sense if you'd looked at the odds clearly and decided to build for the worst case anyway. He knew about the coin. He knew what it had done. He knew about the 14 wards. Harry sat up. Hit the shelf with his elbow, knocked his glasses off, caught them before they hit the floor, which was new, that reflexive catch was faster than anything he'd managed before, and pushed them onto his face. Then he picked up the coin from the floor in front of his cot. He didn't know how he knew it was there. He could feel it the way you can feel a door handle in the dark, something aligned to you specifically. It was cold and quiet in his palm. Whatever it had done was done. He thought about the protocols. His father's voice was not in his head, it wasn't like a person speaking, it was more like a pattern, like knowing a skill, like knowing how to ride a bike without consciously remembering the learning. But there was something of James in it. The wry practicality. The refusal to be sentimental while being, underneath everything, deeply feeling. Protocol 1, Harry thought, was informational. Restore access. Restore knowledge. Put him in a position to act. Protocol 2, he thought, was legal. The vault. Protocol 3 would need serious. He sat in the dark and thought for a while, and it was a different kind of thinking than he'd done before, not Harry who reacted, Harry who improvised, Harry who tried his best and hoped, but something cooler and more certain. Not cold. Certain. There was a difference, and he'd just learned it from a dead man's inheritance. The door of the cupboard opened. He wasn't surprised. He'd felt her outside it for the last few minutes, not quite touching the door. Petunia Dursley stood in the hallway in her dressing gown, holding a letter. She looked like she'd been crying, which Harry had never once seen, and she looked like she was furious with herself for it, which was considerably more familiar. She looked at him in the exact same moment he looked at her, and for the first time in 14 years they actually looked at each other, and neither of them looked away. "You're awake," she said. "Yes." "Did you?" She stopped. Started again. "Did something happen?" "Just now." "Did you feel?" "Yes," Harry said. "I felt it." She held out the letter. Her hand was steady, which he suspected was costing her something. He took it, turned it over. His father's handwriting. He'd seen it before, on the back of photographs, on the inside of his Hogwarts letters, in the journals that Hagrid had brought him in first year, and seeing it here, in Petunia's hand, at 2 in the morning on the floor of Privet Drive, did something to his chest that he recognized now as grief, clean and uncomplicated, which was different from the murky thing he usually felt about his parents. Usually it was tangled with anger and confusion and the particular loneliness of not knowing. This was just grief. It was almost a relief. "He wrote to you," Harry said. 13 years ago." Her voice was clipped, performing steadiness. "I should have read it sooner. I didn't." A pause. "I'm reading it now." "Why now?" She looked at him for a moment as if she was going to say something dismissive or deflecting. He knew the look, he'd watched her deploy it his entire life, and then she didn't. "Because I was afraid," she said, flatly. "For 13 years I was afraid of you and I took it out on you and she stopped. Pressed her lips together. Something crossed her face that was difficult to name, complicated as old weather. "I should not have done that. To you." She said it like pulling a splinter. "Necessary, quick, not looking for anything in return." Harry looked at her. He thought about his father's letter. He hadn't read it, but he knew what was in it, the same way he knew everything else tonight, the protocols having carried with them everything James had encoded. "She loves you. Not the way you think." "He told me what to do," Petunia said. "With the coin. He said, if I ever felt," she stopped again, jaw tight. I want you to know it wasn't nothing. Whatever you think of this house and however you spent these years, it was not nothing. Your mother was not nothing." The house was very quiet. Somewhere above them Vernon turned in his sleep. "I know," Harry said. "I know she wasn't." Petunia nodded once, sharply, like something had been concluded. Then she seemed to realize they were both crouched in and around the cupboard under the stairs at 2 in the morning, which was an odd situation even by the standards of whatever this night had already been. "There is a bedroom," she said. "Dudley's second bedroom. He's not using it." Harry looked at her. "You can move into it," she said. "Tonight, if you want." Vernon won't," a flicker of something practical and determined in her face. "I'll handle Vernon." Harry thought about that room. He'd thought about it for years, not longingly, not desperately, just as a fact about the world, a room that existed, that was his by no reasonable measure, that he occupied briefly at the beginning of summers before being sent back to the cupboard when something annoyed Vernon. He thought about the fact that he was 14 years old and had spent 11 of those years in a cupboard, and the person who had put him there was standing in the hallway offering him a room, not because anything had been magically compelled but because she'd read a letter and cried in an attic and come down the stairs to do something about it. "All right," he said. "Good." She straightened up. "I'll get sheets. It's 2 in the morning. Then I'll get sheets now and you can sleep on them at 2 in the morning." She turned. Stopped. Didn't look back. "Happy birthday, Harry." He stood at the door of the cupboard and listened to her go up the stairs. Then he looked at the coin in his palm one more time. Set it on the shelf beside his glasses case and the single-framed photograph of his parents that he was allowed to keep there. His mother beamed in the photograph. His father caught Harry's eye and did something complicated with his expression, proud and rueful and amused and sorry, all at once. "I know," Harry said quietly. I've got it. Then he started packing. It didn't take long. He'd learned to keep things in order, neat and compact, because a small space rewards that discipline in the way large spaces don't. He had his school trunk at the foot of the bed, his schoolbooks, his wand and its holster sewn into the inside of his jacket. Hedwig's cage was empty, she'd been out hunting, but the cage itself was light enough to carry under one arm. He stood in the hallway outside the cupboard for the last time and he looked at it. Ordinary cupboard. Ordinary door. Peeling paint on the lower hinge where he'd picked at it absent-mindedly over years of sitting on the floor with nothing to do. He had read, in the flood of his father's inheritance, about what his father had imagined his life would be. Not this house. Not this cupboard. Not a childhood mapped around other people's tolerances and moods, engineered small so he'd be easier to manage. James Potter had imagined a son who grew up knowing exactly what he was and exactly what he was worth, not vain, not arrogant, but grounded. Rooted. He'd imagined a son who went into whatever war came next with both eyes open. Harry closed the cupboard door. He picked up his trunk. He walked up the stairs. The bedroom was Dudley's second spare room, wallpapered in a faded nautical theme that must have been Petunia's attempt at decor some years ago, with a real bed and a window and enough space to stand up and turn around without hitting anything. Petunia had put sheets on the bed with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd made a decision and was not going to be theatrical about it. There was a lamp. Harry set his trunk down, sat on the bed, and thought. He thought about Gringotts. The war vault would require him in person. The blood recognition was written into the goblin contract his father had negotiated specifically to prevent anyone else accessing it, and that included Dumbledore, who had been managing Harry's school vault for the past 4 years. He thought about this with something that would have been anger a week ago but felt now more like the clean interest of solving a problem. He thought about Sirius. Sirius Black was innocent. This was not a guess, it was something he'd known since 3rd year, had tried to act on, had been outmaneuvered and had Sirius taken from him before he could do anything about it. He'd spent a year and an occasional letter since being frustrated by his own helplessness. But helplessness was a condition of his old life, and tonight something had shifted. He was not helpless. His father had anticipated this. The legal document in the war vault, drawn up through Charles Potter's goblin law contacts, structured around a clause in ancient magical contract law that predated the Ministry of Magic by 4 centuries, could trigger a mandatory review of Sirius's imprisonment. Not a trial. A review, conducted under the older law, before the DMLE's authority, which meant the Ministry of Magic would not be able to bury it. He needed to get to Gringotts. He needed to get there before Dumbledore understood what had happened tonight and tried to intervene. He did the math. It was nearly 3 in the morning. He had at most 6 or 7 hours before Dumbledore was at Privet Drive. The old man moved quickly when he needed to and he'd felt all 14 wards break. Harry understood now what those wards had been, what they'd been doing, and he was surprised to find that he wasn't devastated by it or consumed with rage. It was a fact. It was a thing that had happened and was now over. He'd deal with the feeling of it later, when there was time, when there were fewer moving pieces in play. He pulled out a piece of parchment. Wrote 3 letters, short, precise. One to Ron, one to Hermione, one to a goblin account manager at Gringotts whose name he now knew because James had known it, because that name was part of the inheritance. He tied all 3 to Hedwig's leg when she arrived back at the window an hour before dawn, her eyes bright and curious, tilting her head at him with the specific expression he'd always read as "You're different tonight." "I know," he told her. "I'll explain later. These need to get there by morning. The Gringotts one is the priority." She regarded him for a moment, then nipped his finger very gently, her version of affirmation, and was gone. Harry lay down on the real bed in the real bedroom, looked at the ceiling, and allowed himself exactly 4 hours of sleep. He was going to need them. Downstairs, Petunia stood at the kitchen sink with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, watching the garden go grey with early morning. Vernon wouldn't be up for another 2 hours. Dudley was deeply asleep, the profound unconsciousness of a teenage boy who'd eaten too much at dinner. She had made a decision. She was not going to unmake it. She'd been afraid of magic for 30 years because magic had taken the best thing in her life away from her, had grown between her and Lily like a wall she hadn't been able to cross, had swallowed her sister whole and given her back in a coffin. That was the truth of it, the truth she'd never said to anyone. She hadn't hated magic. She'd hated what it had cost her. But James Potter had sat down in whatever hour he'd had left and written a letter to the woman he had every reason to dismiss, and he'd said she loves you, and he'd said take care of yourself, and he'd asked her, politely, without demanding, without the casual arrogance of magic folk who assumed the world would accommodate them, to do one thing. And she'd taken 13 years to do it. She thought about Harry's face when she'd given him the letter. Not shocked. Not grateful in the overwhelming way that would have made her feel terrible. Just, there. Present. Like someone who'd already worked out the important parts and was waiting for the rest to catch up. She'd expected a child. She'd gotten something more complicated and less manageable than a child, and somehow, for the first time in his 14 years in this house, that didn't frighten her. She put the tea down. She went to the cupboard under the stairs, the empty cupboard now. His trunk was gone, his things were gone, nothing left but the narrow cot and the shelf and the single-framed photograph he'd left behind, either by accident or decision, her sister beaming and her dead brother-in-law catching a viewer's eye from wherever photographs went when they weren't being watched. She took the photograph. She'd put it in his room in the morning. Before he woke up. It was the least she could do. It was not enough. But it was what she had, and Lily had always said that what you have is where you start. Outside, the sun was just beginning to think about rising. Somewhere over London, a white owl was flying fast, 3 letters under her wing, heading for places that Petunia Dursley would never go. And in the house at the end of Privet Drive, something had changed at its foundations, quiet as a door closing, irreversible as a coin placed on a floor at 2 in the morning by a woman who'd finally decided to stop being afraid. The seal was broken. The game had begun. Chapter 2. The waking Harry slept for exactly 4 hours and woke up at 6:53 without an alarm. He lay still for a moment the way he always did, the old reflex, map the space, map the sounds, figure out if anything was about to be a problem, and then he remembered that the space had changed, and that the sounds were just the ordinary sounds of a house waking up, and that the only problem he had was one he'd already started solving. He was out of bed before 7. The bathroom was free. Dudley was still unconscious, producing snoring sounds that would have embarrassed a lesser teenager, and Harry moved through his morning routine in the economical way years of shared household logistics had trained into him. Shower. Dressed. Wand checked. He stood in front of the mirror above the sink and looked at himself for a moment, the way he occasionally did when he wanted to take an honest inventory. He looked the same. Dark hair, green eyes, lightning scar, still slightly too thin. The mirror had nothing dramatic to report. But there was something in the way he held himself, the slight change in the set of his shoulders, nothing a stranger would clock, but he could feel it, that was different from yesterday. A week ago. A whole childhood. He went downstairs. Petunia was in the kitchen. She had made toast and eggs without comment, without fanfare, just placed a plate at a seat at the table the way she placed plates for everyone else in this house, and she did not say anything when Harry sat down and ate it. Vernon was at the other end of the table behind his newspaper, and Harry watched the precise moment that Vernon registered Harry sitting at the table like a person, eating a plate of eggs like a person, and opened his mouth. "Don't," Petunia said. She was at the counter with her back to both of them. Vernon closed his mouth. Harry ate his eggs. He had a sense his aunt had been awake most of the night and had used some of those hours to have a very serious conversation with herself about how the rest of this was going to go. He respected that. He finished breakfast, put his plate in the sink, and went back upstairs. He had things to do before Dumbledore arrived and he was not going to waste the window. He sat on the bed, the real bed, with the nautical wallpaper and the lamp and the window that looked out over the back garden, and wrote one more letter, this one longer than the others. He wrote it with the careful precision of someone who understood that words on paper were a form of contract, that framing mattered, that the difference between a request and an instruction was sometimes just the order of the sentences. He addressed it to Madame Amelia Bones, Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He did not ask. He informed. He set out 3 facts, cited the relevant legal precedent from wizarding contract law, and attached, using a charm he hadn't known yesterday and knew precisely today, a magically authenticated copy of a document that he hadn't yet physically retrieved from the vault but whose contents were encoded in his inheritance the way a key encodes the shape of a lock. He sealed it. He'd give it to Hedwig when she returned. She'd get to the ministry by noon. Then he went to his trunk and found the small hand mirror he'd been sent by Sirius last year as a way of communicating. He hadn't used it much. Sirius was cautious about it, worried about detection, but the situation had changed and caution was now a luxury neither of them could afford. He held the mirror and said, quietly, Sirius. The mirror fogged. Then cleared. Sirius Black appeared, looking like he'd just woken up, which in his current situation of being a fugitive living out of safe houses meant he slept in his clothes. He had the haggard, angular look of someone who'd been in Azkaban for 12 years and had spent the time since being hunted by the ministry. But his eyes were sharp. Harry? He sat up straighter. It's early. What's? He stopped. Looked at Harry properly. Something's different. Yes, Harry said. I need you to stay where you are for the next 48 hours. Don't move. Don't write to Dumbledore. Don't let him move you. Sirius stared. What happened? My father happened, Harry said. 13 years late, but it counts. Sirius, I need you to trust me. I'm getting you out. Legally. It's going to happen in the next few days and when it does, it's going to be very fast and very loud and I need you to be exactly where you are and wait for a goblin courier. A goblin courier, Sirius repeated, in the voice of a man who had expected to have a fairly ordinary morning. They're better than owls and the ministry can't intercept their communications. When you get the courier, follow the instructions exactly. No improvising. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, complicated and old, some combination of grief and recognition. You sound like James, he said. I know, Harry said. I'll explain later. Stay put. Yeah, Sirius said quietly. Okay, pup. I'll stay put. Harry lowered the mirror. He had maybe 4 hours. Albus Dumbledore arrived at Privet Drive at 10:30. He did not apparate to the doorstep. He apparat to the end of the road, because he was not a careless man and he did not announce himself when he was moving quickly and with purpose and was not entirely certain what he was moving toward. He walked the length of Privet Drive at a measured pace, his traveling cloak exchanged for something more Muggle-appropriate, a long grey coat that still looked slightly wrong in the way his everything slightly wrong in Muggle contexts, and he noted the ordinary appearance of the houses, the quiet of the Saturday morning street, the absence of any obvious magical disturbance. The wards were gone. All 14. He could feel their absence the way you feel the absence of a sound that's been playing for so long you'd stop noticing it. The space around number 4 was magically neutral now, clean, almost, and that neutrality was its own kind of alarm. He rang the doorbell. Petunia opened it. She was composed, spine straight, mouth in its usual precise line, and she looked at him with an expression that was not quite what he'd seen on her face before. There was something harder in it. More deliberate. Like she'd had a long night and come out the other side of it with her mind made up. Albus, she said. Not Professor Dumbledore, not Sir, which told him something. Petunia. I'm sorry to call so early. He smiled, the warm, carefully calibrated smile. "I was hoping to speak with Harry." "He's expecting you," she said. She stood back. "Let him in." He followed her into the sitting room, noting the house, noting the details. Nothing obviously wrong. And then he noticed, the cupboard door under the stairs was ajar, and it was empty. "He's moved rooms," Petunia said, without being asked. "He's in the spare bedroom now." Dumbledore looked at her. "He should have been there from the start," she said, flat and final, and something about her tone made him revise upward, quickly, significantly, his assessment of what kind of night this had been and what kind of woman was standing in front of him. "Yes," he said carefully. "He should have. He's in the garden." He found Harry sitting on the back step, eating an apple, reading what appeared to be a copy of Magical Law, Historical Precedents and Modern Applications, which was not a book that 14-year-olds typically read by choice and was not a book that Dumbledore had ever placed in Harry's library. Harry looked up when he heard him. Just looked up, no surprise, no performance of surprise, no automatic deference. Just looked up the way you look up at someone you were expecting. "Professor," he said. "Harry." Dumbledore came to stand in the garden, which put him in the position of looking slightly down at Harry on the step, the kind of minor positional advantage he deployed without thinking about it. He looked at the boy and understood in the first 5 seconds that something fundamental had changed. "Happy birthday." "Thank you." Harry set the book down on the step beside him, apple core in his other hand, and waited. Dumbledore let the pause extend. He was very good at pauses. He used them to take measure, to let people fill the silence with things they hadn't meant to say. Harry did not fill the silence. "I felt the wards," Dumbledore said at last. "Last night." "I expect you know that." "Yes." "Can you tell me what happened?" Harry looked at him steadily. "My father left a set of protocols. My aunt activated them." "Your aunt?" He kept his voice neutral. Thoughtful. "I didn't know James had, he didn't tell you everything," Harry said. "Not unkindly. Just as a fact. He was fighting a war. He planned for contingencies you didn't know about. I think that was deliberate." Dumbledore absorbed this. He was recalibrating very rapidly, doing it behind the warm, attentive expression, which was also a skill. "The wards I placed were for your protection," he said. "The loss of them is a serious concern. Without those enchantments, the protections derived from your mother's sacrifice are intact," Harry said. "The blood wards based on the sacrificial charm are a separate structure from your overlaid enchantments. They were anchored when I was placed here at 15 months old and they don't require your maintenance. You know that." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "What you placed over them," Harry continued, "were not extensions of that protection. I know what they were. I know what they were doing." A pause. He took a bite of his apple, just because he had it, the small casualness of it deliberate. "I'm not going to shout at you about it. I'm not interested in a fight. But I want you to know that I know." The garden was very quiet. A blackbird was doing something musical in the hedge. "You've inherited James's tactical clarity," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite controlled. Admiration, maybe, and underneath it something that could have been regret. "I should have expected that." "You did expect it," Harry said. "That's why some of the wards were there." Another pause. "Longer this time." "What will you do?" Dumbledore asked. "I have some things to take care of today," Harry said. "You're welcome to come to Gringotts with me if you want. I'm not hiding where I'm going. But I'm not going to ask your permission and I'm not going to wait for you to make arrangements." Gringotts. Dumbledore sat down on the garden bench, which was not something he typically did. Typically he stood, kept himself available to leave, kept conversations mobile. Sitting was a concession. "James's vault." "Yes." "Harry." He folded his hands. Looked at the boy with something unguarded for just a moment, something tired and genuine behind the usual layers. You are 14 years old, in a world that is accelerating toward a war that you have a central role in whether you want one or not. The things I've done, including the things you now know about, I did because I believed the cost was acceptable. I still believe that. He met Harry's eyes. But I'm aware that believing a cost is acceptable is considerably easier when it isn't you paying it. Harry looked at him for a long moment. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, he said. I'm going to remember you said that. He stood up. Brushed off his jeans. I'll see you at Gringotts, he said. Or not. Either way, I'm going. He went inside. The thing about being a wizard in London is that you can be in Diagon Alley from anywhere in the city in about 8 minutes if you know what you're doing and have a legitimate connection to the FLU network. Harry had neither, which was why he'd already worked this out the night before. He walked to the end of Privet Drive and hailed a Muggle taxi. He paid for it with Muggle money from the emergency supply he'd kept in a tin box in his trunk, £11 and some change, enough for the tube to central London and the walk to the Leaky Cauldron from Charing Cross Road, which was exactly what he did. It was a Saturday morning in July. London was crowded and bright and smelled like exhaust and food from the cafes opening up along the Strand. Harry moved through it at a pace that was neither hurried nor dawdling, his school trunk reduced to fit in his jacket pocket, a charm he'd not been able to do yesterday and could do today without a second thought, Hedwig in a travel cage transfigured to look like a sports bag. He had his wand in his inside pocket. He had the coin. He had all the documentation he needed in a sealed envelope folded in his back pocket. He pushed open the door of the Leaky Cauldron and Tom the barman looked up and did a double take. "Mr. Potter," Tom said. "Bit early in the season for you, isn't it?" "Emergency shopping trip," Harry said pleasantly, and kept walking through to the back courtyard. He tapped the bricks. The wall folded open. Diagon Alley shimmered into existence, bright with the usual Saturday traffic, and Harry walked into it with the coin warm in his pocket and a list of things to do that he was already mentally sorting by priority and dependency. He needed the vault first. Everything else depended on what was in the vault. He was halfway up the alley toward Gringotts when he heard running footsteps behind him. "Harry." He turned. Hermione Granger, slightly breathless, her hair larger than usual from what appeared to be a morning spent in the Diagon Alley crowds, a copy of Advanced Arithmetic Theory under one arm and a look on her face that was equal parts alarmed and intensely curious. Ron was 2 steps behind her, a smear of what was probably breakfast on his jacket, looking like a person who had been dragged out of bed by a very determined person and hadn't quite caught up yet. "You wrote at 5 in the morning," Hermione said, which was more accusation than greeting. "On your birthday." That letter had ministry-level authentication seals on it, Harry. I've never seen those on anything not sent from a government office. What happened? "I'll explain inside," Harry said, nodding toward Gringotts. "Come on." "Inside the bank?" Ron caught up, falling into step. "Why are we going to the bank?" "Because I have a vault to open." "Your school vaults, not my school vault." Harry took the steps 2 at a time. The goblin guards watched him with the flat, measuring attention that goblins gave everything. "My father's war vault." Ron said nothing for a moment. "Then, your dad had a war vault?" "Yes. Of course he did." Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione was already formulating questions, he could see it happening in real time, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way she shifted Advanced Arithmetic Theory to her other arm. "Right," Ron said. "War vault. Saturday morning. This is fine." Inside, the bank was its usual cathedral cool, the high vaulted ceilings, the long counters, the goblins working with the focused industry of people who found most human concerns mildly tedious but were deeply engaged with the numbers underlying them. Harry approached the counter directly, which was not what most people did. Most people waited to be acknowledged, because the social architecture of Gringotts was designed to keep humans slightly off balance. Harry didn't wait. "I need to speak with Ragnarok," he said. The teller goblin, narrow-faced, ancient, with ink-stained fingers, looked up at him with the specific expression of a goblin who was about to explain why that wasn't going to happen. Then something shifted. The goblin looked at him, really looked at him, and something moved in those dark eyes, a reassessment happening at speed. "Your name," the goblin said. "Harry James Potter. Account holder for both the Potter School Vault and the Potter War Vault." He set the coin on the counter. The coin that had been used to break the protocols, that still carried the resonance of what it had done. "This is a family authentication token for the War Vault. Ragnarok's name is in the vault contract as the designated account manager. I believe he's been expecting a contact like this for 13 years. The teller looked at the coin. Then looked at Harry again. "Wait here," the teller said, and was gone. Ron leaned over. "How do you know a goblin's name?" "My dad did business with him. I inherited the business relationship." "You inherited a business relationship?" Ron turned to Hermione. "He inherited a business relationship." "Stop narrating it," Hermione said, though her eyes were bright with curiosity. "Harry, the authentication seals on your letter, I recognized one of them. It's a ministry law seal, but it's based on a structure that predates the ministry by at least 3 centuries. Where did you?" "From my father's legal documents," Harry said. He had a solicitor. A goblin law specialist. Some of what they prepared is in the vault and some of it was encoded into the protocols. "The protocols," Hermione repeated. "Right. Those are, in magical law, a protocol is a bound set of contingency enchantments that," she stopped. Looked at him. "You know all of this already, don't you?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since about 2 this morning." She stared at him for a long moment. She was putting things together, he could almost hear the pieces clicking into place. Hermione was not someone you could keep confused for long if you gave her enough data, which was one of the things he valued most about her. "The letters," she said. "The authentication seals. You woke up this morning knowing things you didn't know yesterday. Something happened to your magical inheritance." "Yes. That's," she faltered. "Harry, that's not a small thing. Magical inheritance transfers are extraordinarily rare and incredibly complex. The precedents for it are almost entirely in pre-ministry wizarding law and most modern witches and wizards don't even know they're possible." "I know," he said. "My mum's magical theory is in there too." She was better than anyone ever gave her credit for. Something moved across Hermione's face, something warm and a little wrecked. She'd always had complicated feelings about Lily Potter, the way you have complicated feelings about the great achievement of a person you're being implicitly compared to. "She was brilliant," she said, quietly. "Yes." A door opened at the back of the teller area. A goblin emerged who was older than the others, broader-shouldered, with a quality of stillness that marked certain goblins who'd been in the banking world long enough to find power more interesting than its display. He moved toward the counter with measured steps and looked at Harry with an expression that was difficult to name exactly, a kind of careful recognition, like seeing something arrive that was expected but not assumed. "Harry Potter," said Ragnarok. "Ragnarok," Harry said. "My father spoke highly of you." The goblin's expression shifted very slightly, a thing that might have been respect. "James Potter was an exceptional client," he said. He was also extremely specific about what was to happen when this account was triggered. A pause. He specified that no one was to access the War Vault with you except individuals you chose yourself. He also specified, another pause, more deliberate, that the vault was to be opened immediately upon authentication, without delay for any external parties, regardless of any standing instructions from Hogwarts, the Ministry, or the Order of the Phoenix. Harry was aware of Ron and Hermione on either side of him going very still. "He was thorough," Harry said. He was thorough, Ragnar agreed. He set something on the counter, a small key, darker and heavier than Harry's school vault key, with a stag-shaped grip that matched the coin. He was also one of 3 clients in my 40 years of account management who bothered to learn enough about goblin financial law to have an intelligent conversation about it. The goblin looked at him. He would have been very proud of you, Harry Potter. That is not a thing I say. Thank you, Harry said. He meant it plainly, without performance. Follow me. The war vault was not in the upper levels of Gringotts where the ordinary accounts lived. They went down, deep down, through passages that the cart ride made disorienting, through checkpoints that scanned for enchantments and found nothing alarming, and then further still, until they were in a level of the bank that Harry had not known existed. The door was not the usual vault door. It was old stone, really old, the kind of old that predated cut stone, that looked like it had been here before the bank was built around it, and it was covered in a dense layered pattern of runes that Harry's new inherited knowledge recognized as a combination of Potter family blood magic and goblin warding that would have taken months to build and was essentially unbreakable by external force. Ragnar stepped back. Only you, he said. Harry pressed his hand to the door. Felt the recognition move through it, warmth, then a kind of resonant yes, the magic finding what it was looking for and confirming it. The stone doors swung inward, silent, on perfect balance. Inside was dark for a moment. Then warm light rose from somewhere sourceless and Harry stepped into his father's vault. It was not full of gold. There was gold, a moderate amount, more than the school vault but not extravagant, James Potter having apparently spent most of his money on more practical things. What filled the vault were shelves. Shelves of books, organized by subject. A locked weapons cabinet, nothing dark, nothing illegal, but serious battlefield hardware, the kind of things that had been used in the First War and that you couldn't find in an ordinary shop. A desk in the center, tidy, with a sealed letter in the middle addressed to Harry. A large sealed legal document next to it. And on the far wall, a portrait. James and Lily Potter, painted in the last year of their lives. He was 21. She was 20 years and some months. They were sitting together on a bench in what looked like the back garden of a house Harry didn't recognize, Godric's Hollow, he understood, and they were looking at the painter with the expression people wear when a photograph is being taken by someone they trust. Natural. Together. Alive. Harry stood in front of it and did not move. Lily's eyes opened. She looked at him, and the expression that crossed her face was something so enormous and personal that it felt private, like witnessing something that should have happened in a different version of his life. She reached over and touched James's arm without looking away from Harry. James looked at his son. There he is, James Potter said quietly. His voice was light and quick, the way Harry had known it would be, the way the voice in an inheritance sounds like the person behind the knowledge. Look at him, Lily. I'm looking, Lily said. She was crying. She wasn't trying to hide it. Hi, sweetheart. Harry sat down on the floor of the vault. Behind him, he heard Ron quietly take Hermione's hand, and Hermione let him, and neither of them said anything. I know you have a lot to do today, James said. He leaned forward slightly. His eyes, dark, bright, exactly like the photographs, were wet at the corners. I know how much there is in your head right now and I know you'll manage it all, because you're ours and we made you with everything we had. But I need you to know something first. He stopped. Cleared his throat. You were wanted. Every day of your life you were wanted. And whatever happened, whatever you lived through before you got here, it wasn't what we wanted for you. It was never what we wanted. I know, Harry said. His voice was steady. The grief was there, clean and present, but it didn't overwhelm him. He'd been grieving his parents his whole life, he'd had practice. I know you didn't. The letter on the desk is for you, Lily said. The legal document is for Sirius. Take it to Ragnar, he knows what to do with it. She was still crying, smiling through it. The books. Third shelf from the top, left side, those are mine. The charm theory, the arithmetic spell construction work. You take those first. I will. And the weapons cabinet, James started. James. He's going to need, he will get to it. Lily looked at Harry. Your father wants to give you a tactical briefing. I want to have a conversation with my son. We will get to all of it. There's time. Harry looked at his mother's portrait for a long moment. Lily Potter, 20 years old, the finest charms practitioner of her generation, crying in a painting in a vault under London. He thought about the flower that opened and closed. He thought about Petunia saying she was not nothing in the hallway at 2 in the morning. She's okay, Harry said. Your sister. She did it. Last night. She did what Dad asked her to. Lily pressed her hand over her mouth. She said you weren't nothing, Harry said. She said she wanted me to know that. For a while, the only sound in the vault was Lily Potter crying quietly in her portrait and the distant deep sound of the earth around them. Ron had moved to the bookshelves, pretending to look at titles. Hermione had her face turned away, doing a terrible job of pretending she wasn't affected. James Potter looked at his son. You've got the protocols, he said. You know what comes next. Yes. You know about Sirius. Yes. I'm handling it today. I know you are. James leaned back on the bench. Ran a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it should have been impossible, and Harry recognized it as his own nervous habit, the thing he did without knowing, and the shock of it was small and seismic at once. Dumbledore came, I expect. This morning. And? He's coming around, Harry said. He hasn't decided yet whether to be useful or obstructive. I told him I wasn't hiding what I was doing. James looked at him with an expression of intense satisfaction. That's exactly right, he said. Never hide what you're doing from Albus. It's what he expects people to do and it's why he thinks he's always 10 steps ahead. If you operate in the open, he has to decide whether to help or get in the way, and Albus genuinely does not like being in the way of the right thing. It costs him. I know, Harry said. I read him this morning. Of course you did. James smiled, a real smile, not performed, the kind that was all the more painful for being so familiar. He was right about one thing, incidentally. You've always had my tactical clarity. Your mum's never admitted it. I admitted it when he was 3 and worked out how to unlock the kitchen cabinet you'd charmed shut, Lily said. I said then that he had your stubbornness and your lateral thinking. You called it stubbornness. I called it what it was. Harry sat on the floor of his father's vault and listened to his parents bicker about his childhood in the warm sourceless light, and Hermione came and sat beside him after a while, and Ron on his other side, and it was not enough, it would never be enough. Nothing could make up for what had been missing, but it was something. It was real. It was his. He picked up the legal document from the desk. Turned it over. Sirius's name was on it, and a date, October 31st, 1981, and below that a dense paragraph of goblin law text that even with his father's knowledge took him a moment to parse, and then parsed perfectly. The document was a formal declaration of known innocence, witnessed by James Potter on the night before his death, in the presence of a registered goblin law notary. It described in precise legal language everything James knew about Peter Pettigrew being the secret keeper, the substitution that had been made, and the fact that Sirius Black had no knowledge of the betrayal. It had been filed in the Goblin Legal Archive the next morning by the notary, filed, sealed, and held in trust until a direct blood heir of the Potter family retrieved it. For 13 years, the document proving Sirius was innocent had been sitting in a goblin vault. Dad, Harry said quietly. I know, James said. I should have moved faster. I should have filed it with the ministry directly and not, a pause. A shadow moved across his face. I thought I had more time. I thought we had more time. You did everything you could, Harry said. It wasn't enough. It is now, Harry said. He stood up, document in hand. It's enough now. He gave it to Ragnarok at the vault door. Ragnarok looked at it. Looked at Harry. You understand what this initiates? A mandatory legal review under pre-ministry wizarding contract law. Binding on the DMLE. Not subject to ministerial override. Harry met the goblin's eyes. Yes. I understand exactly what it initiates. Ragnarok smiled. It was a goblin smile, which was an unsettling thing to see, but it was genuine. Your father, he said, had a gift for preparation. He did, Harry said. So do I. They came back up through the levels of Gringotts into the marble foyer, Harry with a bag of his mother's spellwork books, the legal document now in Ragnarok's hands for processing, and the letter from his father folded inside his jacket against his chest. Hermione was quiet in the particular way she was when she had too much to think about and was choosing not to speak yet, and Ron was quiet in the way he was when he'd experienced something significant and was being decent enough not to make it about him. They walked out into Diagon Alley and the Saturday morning hit them, noise, movement, the smell of the shops and the summer crowd. So, Ron said. So, Harry agreed. What next? Harry squinted against the sun. Thought about the timeline. Ragnarok processing the document would take most of the day, Goblin legal procedure was efficient but formal, and the formal steps mattered. By tonight, the filing would be complete. By morning, a copy would be transmitted to the DMLE. Bones would have it on her desk by Monday, which meant, he stopped. Dumbledore was standing at the top of the Gringotts steps. He was not alone. Minerva McGonagall was with him, and she was looking at Harry with an expression that was several things at once, relief, worry, and something underneath both that might have been awe. Harry, Dumbledore said. I came too late, I see. The vault's been accessed and the document's been filed, Harry said, without heat. The legal review of Sirius's case is in process. I used a goblin law filing, so it's outside ministry jurisdiction to block. He looked at Dumbledore. Were you going to block it? A silence. No, Dumbledore said. And to his credit, he said it without hesitation. No, Harry. Sirius deserved a trial 12 years ago. If you found a way to give him one now, I will not stand in the way of it. Good, Harry said. He looked at McGonagall, whose expression had settled into something deeply characteristic, the look she wore when she was prouder of a student than she intended to show. Professor. Mr. Potter, she said. You look well. I feel well, he said, which was true, and the simplicity of it seemed to land on her in a complicated way, because she pressed her lips together very briefly. Walk with me, Dumbledore said. Just to the leaky cauldron. There is one thing I need to tell you, that I should have told you long before today. Harry looked at him. Considered. All right, he said. Ron and Hermione stayed at the top of the steps, Ron with his hands in his pockets, Hermione already opening one of Lily's spellwork books, which was the most Hermione thing she could have done. Harry walked with Dumbledore down the alley, in the Saturday morning crowd, between the brightly lit shop windows, and what Dumbledore told him he'd already partly known from the protocols, but hearing it in Dumbledore's voice, hearing the old man explain it in his own words, without the armor of grandeur, just an old man telling a 14-year-old boy the truth, that was something he hadn't expected. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When it was done, they stood at the entrance to the leaky cauldron. There's more, Harry said. There's more you haven't told me. Yes, Dumbledore said. There is considerably more. And I intend to tell you. Not all today, some of what I have to tell you requires more context than you currently have, and I'm asking you to trust my judgment on the timing of that, even though I understand why you have every reason not to. Harry looked at him. The old man looked back, no warmth performance, no calibrated smile. Just eyes that were very old and very tired and, underneath that, as brilliant and committed as anything Harry had ever encountered. "I'll give you the benefit of the doubt," Harry said. "Once. Don't waste it." Dumbledore nodded. "I won't." Harry pushed open the door of the leaky cauldron and walked through it. Outside, London continued its Saturday in complete ignorance, traffic and tourists and the smell of hot pavement. He had a letter from his father to read. He had his mother's spellbooks to start. He had a godfather to free. And somewhere in a forest in Albania, something that had been accelerating since last night was moving faster, drawn by the resonance of 14 broken wards and a 14-year-old boy who had finally, completely, arrived. Harry ordered a coffee from Tom, because he was 14 and Tom didn't ask questions, and sat in the corner and started to read. Chapter 3, The Living and the Dead. The letter from his father was 4 pages long. Harry read it twice in the corner of the leaky cauldron while Tom pretended not to watch him and the Saturday crowd moved around him in its own business. The coffee went cold. He didn't notice. James Potter's writing style in the letter was nothing like what Harry had expected from the man in the portrait. It wasn't the quick, dry, tactical voice of the inheritance. It was slower. More careful. The handwriting itself was different, the same sharp strokes from Petunia's envelope but with more deliberate spacing, like someone who was aware they were writing something permanent. There were 2 places where the pen had stopped mid-sentence and started again from the same word, which Harry understood, having written difficult letters himself, as the mark of someone who kept stopping to think and deciding that what they'd written was still true. The letter was divided, loosely, into 3 things. The first was personal. Not tactical. Not instructional. Just James Potter telling his son about himself, not who he'd been at school, not the legend, not the war hero, but the specific private things. The way he'd been terrified of fatherhood for the entire pregnancy, convinced he was going to be inadequate. The argument he and Lily had about names, which Harry apparently won by default because they'd been arguing about it the night he was born and Lily had made the final call unilaterally while James was in the corridor having a minor panic attack. The morning after Harry was born, James sitting in the hospital chair at 4 a.m. with Harry asleep on his chest, and understanding for the first time in his life that there was something he would do absolutely anything to protect, and how that understanding had felt less like love and more like a law of nature. The second part was practical. Where to find specific things in the vault. Who among the old order could be trusted and with what caveats, a short, honest list, the assessments clear-eyed and occasionally blunt, some of them at odds with Harry's impressions from 3 years at Hogwarts. Moody, he'd written, unconditional. Trust him completely but tell him everything, he hates being managed. Minerva McGonagall, she'll follow Albus until she sees a reason not to. Give her one if you need to. Remus Lupin, my best friend after Sirius, probably guilty of being too willing to accommodate other people's discomfort about what he is. Don't let him sideline himself. About Dumbledore, James had written, I trust him. I want you to understand that I trust him and I still built all of this without telling him, and those 2 facts can coexist. He is the most brilliant wizard alive and he is genuinely committed to the right outcome and he has a blind spot the size of Wales when it comes to the cost of his strategies. He will use you. Not cruelly, he doesn't have cruelty in him, but thoroughly, the way you use a tool you care about. Make sure you are a person to him first and a strategy second. That requires work. Do the work. The third part was about Voldemort. James Potter, in the last weeks of his life, had assembled everything he knew or suspected about Tom Riddle, his real name, his history, the theory that he had made himself more than mortal through means that were illegal and ancient and had costs James didn't fully understand but had documented as carefully as he could. The word Horcrux appeared 3 times in the last page, underlined once, with a note beside it that said Dumbledore knows more than he said. Push him on this when the time is right. Harry folded the letter. Put it inside his jacket, next to the sealed envelope from Petunia's attic that was now his to keep. He sat for a moment and let everything settle, the way you let sediment settle in water, not forcing clarity, just giving it time. Tom appeared at his elbow with a fresh coffee, unrequested. "On the house," he said, in the tone of someone who was not going to explain why. Harry looked up and the old barman's face was carefully neutral, the professional neutrality of someone who'd been watching wizarding history walk through his bar for 40 years and understood how to be present without intruding. "Thanks," Harry said. "There's a flu message for you," Tom said. "Came in about 20 minutes ago. Wasn't sure if you'd want it immediately." "Who from?" "Hogwarts." Harry considered. Dumbledore had just been here, had walked with him in person, so Hogwarts meant someone else. "I'll take it," he said. The message was in a small sealed paper, flu correspondence, the kind that came through the network and printed itself on the bar's communication parchment. He broke the seal and read it. "Mr. Potter, I have been informed by Dumbledore that certain events have occurred which affect your situation significantly. I will not pretend to know the full picture, but I would like the opportunity to speak with you before you return to Hogwarts in September. I think there are things we should discuss honestly that we have not previously had the chance to discuss. I will be in London today. If you are amenable, I will be at Florian Fortescue's at noon. Severus Snape." Harry read it twice. He set it on the table. Picked up his coffee. Looked at it for a moment. Then he went back to where Ron and Hermione were waiting. They were at a table near the door, the remains of breakfast between them. Ron had apparently found time for a full cooked meal while Harry was reading, and Hermione had made substantial progress through the first of Lily's spellwork books, which she was now holding with the expression of someone who'd found something that was reorganizing their understanding of several things at once. "Snape wants to meet," Harry said, sitting down. Ron's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Sorry?" "He sent a flu message. He wants to meet at Fortescue's at noon." Hermione looked up from the book. "Snape sent you a message?" "Yes. On your birthday. The day after your magical inheritance was restored and Dumbledore's suppressive wards were broken." "Yes. She stopped. "That's actually very interesting." "It's very suspicious," Ron said. "Both," Harry said. "I'm going." "Obviously," Hermione said, already closing the book and reaching for her bag. Ron sighed and ate his last piece of toast in one large, resigned bite. They had an hour. Harry used it efficiently. He went to Madame Malkin's and bought clothes that properly fit, not the oversized second-hand Dudley cast-offs he'd been wearing for years, and the practical experience of selecting clothes that were the right size produced in him something he didn't try to name or make significant, just let exist. He went to the apothecary and bought a set of ingredients that he needed for work he intended to start over the remaining weeks of summer. He went to Obscurus Books and found 3 texts his father's notes had flagged as important, not the kind of books you found on the Hogwarts reading list, but not dark either, the kind of serious theoretical work that required mature magical foundations to use. He could use them now. At 11:20 he ran into Fred and George Weasley outside Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, which was not yet a shop but was clearly in development. Fred had a bag of prototype materials and George had a notebook dense with calculations, and they both looked at Harry with the particular expression of people who'd heard a rumor and were trying to determine how much of it was true. "Harry," Fred said. "Morning," Harry said. "You look different," George said. "I get that a lot today." "Mum's going to want you to come to the Burrow," Fred said. "She's already ridden twice." "Something about, tell her I'll come in a few weeks," Harry said. "I have some things to sort first. Tell her I'm well and I'm being fed." "Are you being fed?" George asked, looking at him. "Yes. Turns out my aunt can cook when she decides to." Both twins absorbed this with the expressionless absorption of people filing information for later. "Right," Fred said. "Well. We wanted to say," he glanced at George. "Something passed between them. Whatever's happening. We're around." If you need the kind of help that isn't, order approved. Harry looked at them. Fred and George Weasley, 19 years old, standing in Diagon Alley with a bag of joke shop prototypes and the underlying quality that he'd always clocked in them, the genuine sharpness behind the performance. They were funny because they were smart. They were troublemakers because they saw the machinery behind things and found it absurd. "I'll remember that," he said. "Actually, hold on." He thought for a moment. "The prototype you've been working on. The one involving the Peruvian instant darkness powder and the decoy detonators." They both stared at him. "How do you know about that?" George said. "My mother was the best charms practitioner of her generation," Harry said. "I'm about to become the second best. If you want to consult on the activation sequence for the detonators, I'm available." He looked at them. "In exchange for access to your distribution network if I need to move something discreetly." Fred and George looked at each other with an expression that was pure delight. "Done," they said simultaneously. Florian Fortescue's was busy at noon, families with children, tourists from the wizarding world and the occasional confused muggle who'd found their way through, the summer ice cream crowd. Harry arrived first, which was deliberate, and chose a table in the middle of the terrace rather than a corner. Corners were where you sat if you were trying to avoid being seen. The middle of the terrace was where you sat if you were making a point. He was eating a chocolate and hazelnut sundae when Snape arrived. Severus Snape in Diagon Alley on a Saturday was a particular kind of incongruence, the black robes, the careful stillness, the expression that was usually aimed at Hogwarts students and was, in this context, slightly displaced. He looked like a man who had come prepared for something and was recalibrating in real time as he crossed the terrace and saw Harry sitting in plain view eating ice cream. He sat down across from Harry. Harry nodded. "Professor." Snape looked at him for a long moment. Really looked at him, the way very few people had the patience to actually look at another person. His eyes moved across Harry's face with the precise attention of someone checking details against a mental catalogue. Whatever he found, it settled something in his expression, not comfort, but a kind of grim confirmation. "You know I can't stand you," Snape said. "I know you can't stand my father," Harry said. "I'm aware they're not the same thing, even if you've had trouble keeping them separate." Snape's jaw tightened. Then, unexpectedly, yes. A waiter appeared. Snape ordered nothing. Harry ate a spoonful of ice cream and waited. "Dumbledore contacted me this morning," Snape said. "He told me what had occurred. Not all of it, he doesn't tell anyone all of it, but enough." He folded his hands on the table. They were ink-stained, the way they always were, and they were very still in the way that was either natural stillness or extremely cultivated stillness. Harry had never been sure. "He told me that your father's protocols had activated and that you had recovered a significant portion of your magical inheritance. He told me you had accessed the War Vault." "Yes. He told me the vault contained your mother's spell work." Harry looked at him. Snape's voice had done something very small and very controlled on the word mother. "Yes," Harry said. "It does. She was good. She was extraordinary. Flat. Final. A fact, not a sentiment, which made it, paradoxically, more sentimental." Harry set his spoon down. "Professor. Why did you ask to meet me?" Snape looked at the table for a moment. Then back at Harry. "Because Dumbledore told me one more thing," he said. "He told me, and I want to know if this is accurate, that among the documents in the vault there was a personal letter from your father." "Yes. And in that letter, a pause. Brief. The kind of pause that isn't dramatic but is instead a person deciding whether to continue. Was your father's personal assessment of me." Harry looked at him. "I need to know," Snape said, very quietly, "what he wrote." The terrace was full of the noise of an ordinary Saturday. Children arguing about ice cream flavors. A family 2 tables over laughing at something. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things around a conversation that was anything but. Harry thought about the passage in the letter. His father's handwriting, the careful spacing that meant he'd been deliberate about the words. He could quote it. He had it completely, word for word, the way you have things you've read twice and held close. He wrote, Harry said, that you were the most talented student of your generation and that he spent 3 years making your life difficult because he was young and you were an easy target and it was wrong. He wrote that he knew it was wrong while he was doing it and did it anyway because of the way, he said this specifically, because of the way you looked at my mum. Harry watched Snape's face. Nothing moved on it. Nothing moved, which was its own movement. He wrote that he understood it, in the end. That you were in love with her and that he'd taken something from you, not Lily herself, because she made her own choices, but the version of things where you and she stayed friends. He wrote that he was sorry for that. The silence that followed was the loudest quiet Harry had sat in since the vault. Snape was looking at the table. His face was, Harry had seen Snape angry, contemptuous, precise, occasionally something approaching passion when he talked about potions. He had never seen Snape look like this. The expression was stripped back. Ancient. Something that had been under everything else for a very long time and had no name except the kind of grief that comes from loss before you knew what you were losing. He had no right to be sorry, Snape said. His voice was completely level, which took visible effort. He won. She chose him. Being sorry for winning is, he wasn't sorry for winning, Harry said. He was sorry for being 17 and cruel about it. Snape looked up. Harry met his eyes. I'm not my father, Harry said. I don't think you've ever let yourself see that clearly, because looking at me is easier if I'm him. But I'm also my mother's son. And I think, from what I know about her now, from her work, from her notes, I think she would want me to say that to you. Snape stared at him. She kept every photograph of you from Hogwarts, Harry said. They were in the vault. Not in a frame, in an envelope marked with her name, in the section of the vault my father specifically told me were hers. He paused. She didn't forget you. Whatever happened between you. The thing on Snape's face broke, briefly, and reset. A hairline fracture, sealed before it could widen. He looked down at the table. Looked back up. The mask came back on, but it fit differently now, looser, like clothing that had been washed wrong. What do you want from me? Snape said. Not a demand. Almost confused. Nothing today, Harry said. I want you to know what he wrote. And I want you to know that I read it and I made a decision about what it meant for how I think about you, which is that I'm starting from scratch. Not from 4 years of a bad relationship. He looked at Snape. You're an asset, Professor. You know things I need to know and you're operating under constraints that compromise you and I'm not interested in compounding those constraints by being someone you have to manage. He picked up his spoon again. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. Snape sat across from him in the Saturday sun and said nothing for a long time. Your father would never have said that, he said at last. No, Harry agreed. He would have been smug about it. Made a production of the generosity. Probably. You are, Snape stopped. Disconcertingly like her. I'll take that, Harry said. Another silence. The family 2 tables over had resolved the ice cream argument. A child was now eating something enormous and pink, deeply satisfied. Life continued, oblivious. I'm still your potions professor, Snape said, with the deliberate tone of someone establishing parameters. My behavior in that context will be what it is, Harry said. I can handle potions. You've been abysmal at potions. I've been sabotaged at potions, Harry said pleasantly. I expect that'll change. A long pause. Yes, Snape said. I expect it will. He stood. Looked at Harry one more time, something measured and complicated and unresolved, the look of a person who'd had something confirmed that they'd both wanted and dreaded to have confirmed. "Potter," he said. "Professor. Your mother's spellwork on the Sixth Order charms constructions in her third year." He said it carefully. "She made an error in the base equation that she corrected in a footnote she wrote 3 months later. The footnote is on a loose page. Don't lose it, the main texts make no sense without it." Harry looked at him. "You've seen her spell work?" "She showed it to me," Snape said. "When we were 12. He turned and walked off the terrace. Harry watched him go, the black robes incongruous in the summer crowd, until he turned a corner and was gone. Then Harry ate the rest of his ice cream. Ron and Hermione had been at a nearby table for the entire conversation, close enough to intervene, far enough not to intrude, which was the specific calibration of good friends who knew when to be present and when to be invisible. They came back over when Snape was gone, and Ron sat down and looked at Harry with an expression that contained a significant amount of confusion. "What was that?" Ron said. "A reset," Harry said. "Hopefully. He called you disconcertingly like your mum. He meant it as a compliment." "Snape gave you a compliment." "Oblique one." "Harry." Ron leaned forward. "I need you to know that today has been the strangest day of my life, and my life includes the time Fred transfigured all my dress robes into dress-wearing robes." "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, I'm here for it," Ron said immediately. "I'm just cataloging." Hermione, who had been quiet through this exchange in the way she was quiet when something was occupying significant processing power, set down her copy of Lily's spellwork and said, "Harry. The magical theory in this book." She paused. "Your mother was working on a framework for layered protean charms that the current academic community doesn't know exists. If this was published, it would change the way we teach Newt-level charms." "I know. She wrote this when she was 19. "I know." Hermione looked at the book and then at Harry, and what crossed her face was something that happened rarely, genuine awe, uncomplicated, the pure reaction of someone who'd found something bigger than their expectations. "She was extraordinary," she said. "I know that too," Harry said. "I'm starting to." He paid for the ice cream and they walked back through Diagon Alley in the afternoon heat, the three of them, the day changing around them. The morning had been about the vault and the legal documents and the maneuvering. The afternoon felt different, looser, less urgent, the way time feels after you've done the important things and the results are working through their processes and you have to just let the machinery run. They went to Flourish and Blots because Hermione had 3 books she'd been trying to locate since June. Ron got into an extended negotiation with the owner of Quality Quidditch Supplies over a broom service kit. Harry moved through the afternoon with his friends and thought about his father's letter and the portrait's voice and the look on Petunia's face in the hallway at 2 in the morning and felt all of it as one continuous thing, the thread of it, his life having a shape he could trace now instead of just living inside it without seeing its outline. At 4:30, Hedwig found him in the street. She dropped out of the sky with the kind of purposeful velocity that meant she'd been looking for him specifically and wasn't interested in being subtle about it. She landed on his shoulder, and in her beak was a return letter, sealed with a green wax crest he recognized as the DMLE seal. He broke it open on the pavement. "Mr. Potter, I received your communication this morning. I want to be clear that what you have described, if accurate, represents a significant failure of the justice system for which I do not intend to offer excuses. I am initiating the mandatory review process under my own authority, in parallel with the Goblin Law filing you have already submitted. The review will commence within 72 hours. I have also taken the liberty of notifying the Wisengamot Oversight Committee. There will be no quiet burial of this. Madam A. Bones, DMLE Director. P.S. I knew your parents. Your mother saved my sister's life in 1979 during a Death Eater attack on the Bones estate. I have been looking for a legitimate reason to correct what happened to Sirius Black for years. You have given me one. I will not waste it. Harry handed the letter to Hermione without a word. She read it. Passed it to Ron. 72 hours, Ron said. Yes. Sirius could be free in 72 hours. If the review goes how it should. The document is airtight, it's a sworn statement from a direct primary source, notarized under Goblin law, filed before any bias could be established. The only way to reject it is to reject the legal process entirely, which would require Fudge to move against the DMLE director and the Goblin Banking Authority simultaneously. Harry folded the letter. He won't do that. He's not brave enough and it's not good politics. You've thought this through, Ron said. My dad had 12 years to set it up, Harry said. I just had to get it moving. They were standing on the pavement outside Flourish and Blots in the late afternoon sun, and Harry became aware that this moment, this specific unremarkable Saturday afternoon moment, was something he'd been moving toward without knowing it. Not the dramatic vault opening, not the conversation with Dumbledore in the garden, not even the portrait. Just this, standing in a street he knew, with his friends, holding a letter that said within 72 hours, knowing that he'd done what he was supposed to do and that it was working. He felt very slightly and very completely all right. They took the floor back to Diagon Alley's connected residential addresses. Ron and Hermione were both staying at a nearby Wizarding Inn that Mrs. Weasley had arranged, since the original plan had been for Harry to come to the Burrow for the tail end of summer. That plan was going to need revision, but not today. Harry fled back to Privet Drive. He stepped out of the kitchen fireplace into a house that smelled like dinner cooking, and found the kitchen occupied by Petunia at the stove and Dudley at the table, and the particular quality of the room was different from any version of this kitchen Harry had ever been in. Not dramatically different. The furniture was the same. The lighting was the same. But there was an absence of the low-grade tension that he'd lived in for so long he'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a sound until it stops. Dudley looked at him. Dudley, who was large and blond and had spent 14 years following his father's lead on the subject of Harry, looked at him with an expression that was awkward, confused, and, underneath that, curious. Not malicious. Just curious, the way a person is when the frame they've been given for something turns out to be the wrong size. There's dinner, Petunia said, without turning from the stove. 40 minutes. Thanks, Harry said. He went upstairs. Unpacked the books from Diagon Alley, stacked them on the shelf. Put his mother's spellwork on the desk, not the shelf, the desk, where he'd work from them. Changed his jacket for something lighter. Sat on the window ledge for a moment and looked at the garden in the evening light, the ordinary suburb going gold in the late sun, and thought about all the things that were in motion and what needed attention next. He thought about Remus Lupin, who didn't know any of this had happened, who was living in the constrained half-life of a werewolf in a society that wasn't built for him, who had been his parents' friend and Harry's most decent defense against the dark arts teacher and who deserved to know that Sirius was hours away from a legal review. He wrote the letter. Short, warm, specific, not asking Lupin to act, just telling him what was happening, giving him the timeline, and telling him to expect to need to testify at the review. He added one line at the end: my father said you were his best friend after Sirius and that you needed someone to push back on your habit of sidelining yourself. Consider this the first push. He sealed it. He'd send it tonight. He wrote one more letter. This one took longer, not because he didn't know what to say but because saying it correctly mattered. He addressed it to Sirius, to the Mirror, which meant it would send directly. The legal review commences within 72 hours. Bones is running it personally and the Goblin Law filing is already in the archive. Your testimony is not required at this stage, the document is primary evidence. Don't do anything dramatic. Don't come to London. Don't contact anyone from the Order except Lupin, who I'm writing to separately. The moment the review concludes, you'll have access to everything, the house, the accounts, everything my father set aside for you. Just wait. He loved you. He wrote it down. I thought you should know. Harry, he sent the mirror message. He was setting it down when the door of his room opened, not knocked, opened, because Dudley didn't knock, had never knocked on the door of any room because until last night this particular room was his. Dudley stopped in the doorway with the expression of a person who'd arrived on a mission and was now recalculating. "Mum said dinner in 30, Dudley said. "Thanks." Dudley lingered. He was looking at the books on Harry's desk with an expression of mild bewildered interest. "Are those new?" "Got them this morning." "You went to London?" "Yes." "On your birthday?" "Yes." Dudley shifted his weight. This was as close to a conversation as they'd managed in about 7 years, and Harry was aware of treating it with the specific delicacy that first conversations after long silences required, not pushing, not retreating, just present. "Mum told me," Dudley said. "This morning." About what she did." "Last night." He stopped. "About the coin." Harry waited. "She cried," Dudley said. "My mum was crying in the attic." He said it like a fact he was still processing. "She doesn't cry. She literally doesn't cry." "I know," Harry said. "What did you?" Dudley stopped. Started again, differently. "What was it like? Whatever happened last night. What was it like?" Harry thought about how to answer this honestly for someone who had no frame for magic at all. "Like waking up," he said. "Like waking up and being able to see properly." Dudley looked at him. "Were you not before?" "No," Harry said. "Not really." "Right." Dudley absorbed this. He looked at the doorframe, at the floor, at Harry. "Sorry," he said. Very quietly. Very quickly. You know. The cupboard and stuff." Harry looked at his cousin. Dudley Dursley, large and awkward, 14 years old, standing in his own bedroom doorway apologizing for the logistics of a childhood that neither of them had designed but both had lived in. The apology wasn't sophisticated. It didn't have to be. "It's done," Harry said. "Move forward." Dudley nodded. "Once." That was apparently what he'd come to do, because he left directly, footsteps heavy down the hallway. Harry turned back to his desk. He pulled one of his mother's spellwork books toward him and opened it to the first page, which bore her name in the handwriting he recognized from the Hogwarts letters. Lily J. Evans, 1976. She'd have been 15. This was her personal theory journal, not an academic text, full of working notes and crossed-out calculations and margin annotations in a hand that got faster and more certain as the pages went on, the handwriting of someone who was working something out and felt it getting clearer as she went. Harry read for an hour before dinner. He ate at the table with Petunia and Dudley and the empty chair where Vernon had decided, apparently, to have dinner in front of the television, and nobody made a production out of the fact that things were different. Petunia served the food. Dudley talked about football in the unpracticed way he talked about things he was actually interested in rather than things he was performing interest in. Harry said 2 or 3 things about Quidditch that were analogous enough to be conversational. The kitchen was warm. Afterward, Harry helped clear the plates, which he had always done and Petunia had never acknowledged, except that tonight she said, "Thank you," briefly, over the running water of the sink, and Harry said, "Of course." He went back to his room. Continued reading. At 9 in the evening, he felt it. Not through the protocols, those were done, complete, the sequence finished. This was something else. A disturbance, subtle and cold, at the edge of his magical awareness, the way the air changes before a storm. It lasted only a few seconds, then was gone. He sat very still with the spellbook in his lap. Something in Albania had felt the activation of the protocols. Had felt 14 wards break. Had felt the wave of James Potter's war magic rolling out from a house in Surrey and had oriented toward it, the way a compass needle orients, the way something that has been pointing at you for 14 years sharpens its bearing when you become visible. Harry thought about the last page of his father's letter. The word Horcrux, underlined. The note, push Dumbledore on this when the time is right. He thought, the time is coming toward right faster than I'd like. He put the book down. Got his wand. Did not put it away again. He sat in the quiet room in the quiet house and thought about the board. About the pieces on it. About what Voldemort could do in his current state, weakened, wraith-like, surviving in someone else's body or no body at all, needing to return to full power before he could move directly. About how long that would take and what it would require. About what his father had written about Tom Riddle's real name and real history, the Muggle orphanage and the school years and the thing with the diary and the chamber and the things he'd done to himself in pursuit of immortality. About the Triwizard Tournament, which was supposed to happen this year, which Dumbledore had referenced obliquely in his conversation this morning, which Harry's inherited knowledge flagged as something that required careful attention because his father, somehow, had suspected that the tournament was going to be used as a vector. James Potter had not known about the tournament specifically. He'd known about the pattern, that Voldemort's followers moved in particular ways, that large public magical events with security challenges were attractive targets, that if a resurrection was planned it would need something that couldn't be replicated easily. Blood, his father had written. He'll want blood. Specifically. Think about why. Harry thought about why. He sat with it for a long time, the cold evening coming in through the open window, Hedwig asleep on her perch, the suburban quiet of Privet Drive settling into its nighttime state. Then he picked up the spellwork book again. If what was coming, then he needed to be ready in the way his father had meant ready, not just powerful, not just informed, but prepared. Armor before battle, not during. His mother's spellwork was theory. He needed the practice. He had 5 weeks before September and a bedroom and no one telling him he couldn't use magic because he was a minor, because he'd had a conversation with Dumbledore this morning that had covered, among other things, the Ministry's monitoring of underage magic, and Dumbledore had not said explicitly that Harry would be exempt from that monitoring, but he had said, with the tone of a man making a decision, that he would be managing the relevant Ministry department directly. Harry read until midnight. He was 14 years old, and somewhere in Albania something was moving faster, and at Gringotts a legal document was working through its processes, and in Azkaban Sirius Black was sleeping without knowing how close freedom was, and in a Hogwarts office Dumbledore was sitting with cold tea and the knowledge that the game had changed. Harry turned a page. His mother's handwriting moved across it, corrections, annotations, the record of a brilliant mind working at full capacity, leaving a trail for someone who came later. For him, as it turned out. As she must have hoped. He thought, I've got you, Mum. I'm paying attention. He read on. Chapter 4, 37 hours. The review took 37 hours. Harry knew this because he counted them. Not obsessively, he had enough to do with his mother's spellwork and his father's tactical notes and 3 increasingly long letters from Hermione, who had taken Lily's charm theory back to the inn and was apparently not sleeping, but he was aware of the hours the way you're aware of a clock in an exam room. Present. Ticking. Relevant. The first 24 passed with no word, which was expected. Ragnarok had explained the Goblin Law process with the precision of someone who found procedural accuracy a matter of pride. The filing would be reviewed internally, authenticated, cross-referenced against the original notarized record, and transmitted to the DMLE simultaneously with a Goblin legal advocate's formal endorsement. The endorsement was the important part. It meant the Ministry couldn't dismiss it as forgery. It meant Fudge couldn't bury it on a technicality. It meant the document had the weight of 2 separate legal systems behind it, and the only way to reject it was to reject both, which would create a diplomatic incident with Gringotts that no Minister of Magic wanted. Cornelius Fudge, Harry had concluded, was not brave enough for a diplomatic incident with anyone. He spent the first day reading and practicing. He converted the spare bedroom into a functional workspace, the desk covered in his mother's spellwork, a cleared section of floor for practical work, Hedwig's perch in the corner. He started with the charms constructions his mother had documented at 15 and found that what had been theory in his head the morning after the protocols activated became tactile understanding the moment he actually tried the spells. His magic responded differently now, not louder, not flashier, but cleaner, like an instrument that had been properly tuned for the first time. The gap between intention and execution was narrower. He cast a fourth-order protean variant his mother had designed at 16 and it worked on the first attempt, which he noted, and then set about understanding why it worked so he could make it work again with variables. Hermione came on the second morning with the kind of energy that meant she'd been up since 5. She arrived at the door of number 4 and Petunia opened it, and the two of them had a brief exchange in the hallway that Harry didn't witness but whose outcome he understood from the fact that Hermione arrived in his room looking slightly startled in a way she reserved for things that recalibrated her expectations. "Your aunt offered me tea," she said. "She makes good tea," Harry said. "She asked me about my parents." Hermione sat down in the chair by the desk. She seemed genuinely curious. "She spent 30 years trying not to be curious about the magical world," Harry said. "I think she's letting herself be curious now. Don't make it weird." Hermione looked at him, set down the stack of books she'd brought, and decided that was enough on that subject. "Okay. I've been working through the third-year spell work." She spread a set of notes across the desk, covered in her characteristic dense handwriting, the kind of notes that required their own index. "The protean framework your mother built is extraordinary, Harry. The standard protean charm creates a one-to-one link between objects, one source, multiple connected items. What she's proposing is a recursive architecture. Multiple sources, conditional connections, directional information flow." She looked at him. "It's essentially the theoretical basis for a completely new class of communication magic." "She designed it as a resistance tool," Harry said. "For the Order, in the First War. Dumbledore didn't adopt it, he had his own system. She kept developing it anyway." "Why didn't Dumbledore use it?" "Because he didn't design it," Harry said. "And because it worked better if the person running it wasn't him." Hermione absorbed this. That's actually a recurring pattern in organizational magical theory, the centralization problem, where a system built around a single powerful individual is efficient but brittle, Hermione. "Right. Yes. Practical applications." She pulled one of the notebooks toward her. "I want to build it. The full framework. If what's coming is what I think it's coming," she stopped. Looked at him directly. "The Triwizard Tournament is this year." "Yes. And you think something's going to happen at it?" "My father suspected it would be used as a vector." "I agree with him. So we have, roughly 2 months. Before we go back to school." She looked at the notes. "That's enough time to build at least the foundational architecture of the communication network. If we do it right, we can have a functioning version operational before the first task." She paused. "Ron's good with the network theory, actually. He thinks in connection patterns, he does it with chess, spotting which pieces talk to each other." Harry thought about this. His father's letter had mentioned working with people who were good at different things, not trying to be good at all the things yourself. "Yes," he said. "Bring Ron in. Brief him properly, not a summary, he works better with the full picture than with selected information." "I know," Hermione said, slightly indignant, as if this was obvious. "You sometimes give him selected information because you're not sure he'll handle the full picture." She paused. "That's," another pause. "That's fair." They worked through the morning. It was comfortable in the specific way of working alongside someone who is genuinely useful, not performing collaboration but actually thinking together, the kind where you can be quiet for 30 minutes and then say half a sentence and the other person knows what the other half is. Ron arrived at noon with sandwiches and the hand mirror, which he held up as he came through the door. "Sirius tried to contact me," he said. He couldn't reach Harry's mirror. I think the ward break did something to its range, so he tried mine. Harry straightened. What did he say? He got a goblin courier. Ron set the mirror on the desk. 2 hours ago. He seemed like someone who'd been told something completely mad and had to decide whether to believe it. He looked at Harry. He said the courier gave him a sealed document and a communication token and told him that by the authority of the Potter family estate and the Goblin Legal Archive, his legal status was under active formal review and that he should remain in his current location pending an official summons from the DMLE. Ron looked at the ceiling. He also said, and I'm quoting here, "Tell Harry that I have never been more grateful for anything in my life and also I'm going to need a moment." He's got one, Harry said. He also said he heard from Lupin. Ron sat on the edge of the desk, which displaced 3 of Hermione's notes and earned him a look that he absorbed without incident. Lupin apparently wept. According to Sirius. Which Sirius told me in the voice of someone who was also definitely not weeping at the time of the telling. Harry smiled. Turned back to the desk. Thought about Remus Lupin in whatever spare room he was occupying this month, reading a letter from a 14-year-old that said your best friend might be free in 72 hours. The second day passed. At 6 in the morning of the second day, the mirror pulsed. Harry was awake. He'd been up since 5 working on a shielding variant his mother had designed that was theoretically capable of deflecting indirect curse vectors, which was more complicated than it sounded and required him to hold 2 separate magical intentions simultaneously and balance them. He was on his 4th attempt and getting closer. The mirror pulsed on the shelf and he crossed to it in 3 steps. Sirius appeared immediately, like he'd been watching the other side of the mirror for hours. His face was different from every other time Harry had seen it, not the haunted, gaunt fugitive look, not the manic energy of the early escaped prisoner period. He looked like someone who had received official news and hadn't yet found the shape of what that meant. "It's done," Sirius said. "Harry, the review's complete. I got an official communication from Madame Bones 20 minutes ago. By Goblin Law Courier, which apparently is a thing that can happen and I had no idea." He stopped. His voice was steady but only technically. "It's a full exoneration, not just a review. The document your father filed, when they checked the Goblin Archive, the original notarized record was there, sealed, exactly as filed. 13 years. It was sitting there." He stopped again. "Wormtail's official status has been changed to wanted criminal. There's a warrant." "I know," Harry said. I don't have to hide anymore." Sirius said it slowly, like a sentence he'd been afraid to form. "I have to go to the ministry for a formal processing, something about restoring my status. Bones said it takes about 4 hours, but after that I'm another stop. I can have a house. I can go outside. You can be Harry's legal guardian," Harry said. Sirius went completely still. "My current legal guardianship under the Muggle arrangement has no wizarding equivalent," Harry said. "Dumbledore structured it that way deliberately. Once your status is restored, you're eligible. My father named you in his will as first-choice guardian." He looked at Sirius in the mirror. "If you want it. I'm not assuming." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Whatever was happening in his face was too layered to call a single expression. "You'd want that," he said. "After you've had 14 years without me. You don't even properly know me." "No," Harry said. "But I'd like to." Sirius pressed a hand over his eyes. "Not crying. Just needing a moment, the way you need a moment when something you've been certain was gone forever turns out not to be." "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Yeah, I want it." "Go to the ministry," Harry said. "Take Lupin with you if he can get there, he should be part of this. Don't let them draw it out past today. Bones wants this resolved cleanly and quickly before Fudge can think of a political angle. You've got this all mapped out." "My father had most of it mapped out." I'm just executing. James would have been absolutely insufferable about this, Sirius said, and his voice cracked on the last word, very slightly, and he covered it immediately with a sound that was approximately a laugh. He would have been so smug. I know, Harry said. I'm trying not to be. You're doing well. I'll get worse. Sirius actually laughed at that. There he is, he said. All right. I'm going. Lupin's already here. He arrived at 6 this morning because apparently he couldn't stay put. He paused. Harry. Thank you. For all of it. Thank my dad, Harry said. He did the work. I will, Sirius said quietly. I'll thank him every day. The mirror cleared. Harry stood with it in his hand for a moment. Outside, Privet Drive was beginning its morning, the milk float, the early dog walkers, the paper delivery. The suburb that had contained his childhood going about its business, completely unaware that in the last 37 hours a man had been freed from 13 years of false imprisonment, a dead man's love for his sister-in-law had broken 14 magical wards, and a 14-year-old boy had quietly and completely changed the terms of a war. He went downstairs and made himself breakfast. Dumbledore arrived at noon. He didn't ring the doorbell this time. He knocked, 2 precise knocks, different from the doorbell, and Harry heard it from upstairs and knew before he'd consciously identified the pattern. He came down to find Petunia already opening the door, standing in the frame with her hands clasped in front of her, her expression doing the specific thing it did now when she was preparing to not be intimidated. The garden, Harry said from the stairs. Dumbledore looked up at him. Something moved briefly in his expression, not surprise, but a kind of recalibration. Good morning, Harry. Good morning. Harry came down the stairs. Petunia moved aside, and he passed her and went through the kitchen to the back door. He heard Dumbledore follow. He heard Petunia put the kettle on, which he thought was probably her version of a power move. The garden in the midday sun was warm and ordinary. Harry sat on the back step. Dumbledore sat on the bench. The blackbird was back in the hedge. The review completed, Dumbledore said. Yes. Sirius will be processed at the ministry this afternoon. He looked at his hands. I should tell you, I spoke with Amelia Bones this morning. She made some observations about the nature of the legal filing and the fact that the original document had been in the Goblin Archive for 13 years. She made observations to you specifically. She was fairly direct about what she felt my institutional responsibilities were, given that I was aware of Sirius's situation and had access to the relevant channels and did not. He stopped. She was right to be direct. Harry looked at him. Why didn't you? You knew Sirius was innocent. Knowing and proving are different things, Dumbledore said. And at the time, a public trial for Sirius carried risks I was not willing to accept. It would have required testimony about Pettigrew, about the secret keeper exchange, which would have revealed that your parents had not trusted me to be their secret keeper. They trusted Sirius more, Harry said. That's not an accusation. They just did. Yes. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I won't pretend that didn't sting. I also won't pretend it was the only reason I avoided a formal proceeding. The simpler truth is that Sirius in Azkaban was not my problem to solve in 1981. I had a great many other problems and Sirius, wrongly, seemed solved. He met Harry's eyes. That was a failure of my better judgment and I will not justify it with context. Harry listened to this. He thought about his father's letter. He is genuinely committed to the right outcome and he has a blind spot the size of whales when it comes to the cost of his strategies. I know, he said. Thank you for saying it clearly. Your father did not like me very much in the end, Dumbledore said. I think you know that. He trusted you, Harry said. He wrote that specifically. Those aren't the same thing. Dumbledore smiled, very small. No. They're not. He looked at the garden for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I said I would tell you, in the leaky cauldron. You said I'd mentioned there was more." "The Triwizard Tournament," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. "My father suspected it," Harry said. He didn't know about the tournament specifically, but he knew about the pattern. High-profile magical event, security challenges, large gathering of people who can't all be vetted. And Voldemort needs, he stopped. He needs a specific kind of blood, doesn't he? For a full restoration. The garden was very quiet. "Yes," Dumbledore said. He said it with the weight of a man who'd been carrying this particular piece of information alone for a long time and was now setting it down somewhere. Tom Riddle made himself difficult to kill. Not impossible, nothing is impossible, but significantly complicated. He split his soul. He paused. More than once. The objects he used are called Horcruxes. Each one anchors a piece of his soul to the living world. As long as any of them exist, he cannot be destroyed permanently. Harry let this land. He'd had his father's partial information, the word, the theory, the instruction to push. Having the full statement from Dumbledore himself was different. More real. More solid. "How many?" Harry said. 7, I believe, was his intention. "I know of several with certainty. Some I have located. Some I am still working to identify." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "I was intending to tell you this, but not yet. Not at 14. You thought I wasn't ready." "I thought you were still becoming ready," Dumbledore said. "There's a difference. Now I'm ready." "Now," Dumbledore said carefully, "you are considerably more ready than I planned for at this stage, and adapting my timeline is the only intelligent response." He folded his hands. "There is also the matter of the tournament, and the prophecy, and a great many other things that connect in ways I am still mapping. I would like, if you are willing, to meet regularly this summer." "Not to manage you," he said, before Harry could respond. "To actually inform you. Everything I know. Laid out completely, with no selections for palatability." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Thought about the letter. "Make sure you are a person to him first and a strategy second. That requires work. Do the work." "I'll agree to that," Harry said. "Under one condition." "Name it." "Sirius is in the room," Harry said. "For all of it. He knows as much as I do about the First War and probably more about Voldemort's operational methods during that period. If you're briefing me, you're briefing him." Dumbledore considered this. Harry watched the consideration, the real kind, not the performance of consideration, the genuine weighing of whether this was workable. "There is some information that, then explain why," Harry said. "Not just no. Explain why, specifically. I'll decide if the reason is good enough." "You'll decide," Dumbledore repeated. A flicker of something that might have been amusement, or respect, or both. "You are," he said, "remarkably like your mother in negotiation." "I know," Harry said. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," Dumbledore said. Harry stood up. "Good. He'll be free by evening. We can start tomorrow." He spent the afternoon at his mother's desk, working. The shielding variant finally resolved on the 7th attempt. The trick was not balancing two intentions simultaneously but sequencing them so fast they functioned simultaneously, which was a subtle but completely different problem. When it worked, the shield came up with a quality he'd never felt in his standard Protego, a kind of layered density, and he tested it against increasingly forceful stunning spells and it held well past the point the standard shield would have collapsed. He wrote up the sequence. Left it on the desk for Hermione, who would understand the notation. Then he sat down and read his father's section on Voldemort's operational history, the part about the First War, how he'd moved, who he'd used, what his patterns were when he was at full power. It was a soldier's account, not a historian's, specific, functional, attentive to the things that actually mattered in practice. Harry read it with his full attention and built a picture from it that was more complete than anything he'd gotten from Hogwarts, from conversation, from the limited information he'd been allowed. Tom Riddle was brilliant. His father had not underestimated this, and neither did Harry. He was brilliant, he was patient in the medium term even if he was impulsive in the short, and his fundamental mistake was the same mistake that powerful people with a fixed worldview always made: he'd decided what mattered and stopped being curious about the things that didn't fit. He'd decided a half-blood boy from Cokeworth didn't matter. He'd been wrong. Harry closed the notebook. He went downstairs. Dudley was watching football on television, sprawled on the sofa in the particular boneless way of teenage boys. Petunia was in the kitchen with a cup of tea and the newspaper. The house was quiet and warm and ordinary, and Harry sat in the kitchen and drank a glass of water and said, "Aunt Petunia." She looked up. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "For the letter. For what you did." He paused. "I know it wasn't small." She looked at him for a moment. Then back at the newspaper. "Your mother would have done the same," she said. "She would have done it for my child without a second thought." A pause. "I should have been more like her." "You did it," Harry said. In the end." "In the end," she agreed. They sat in the kitchen together and didn't say anything else, and that was all right. Some conversations are complete in fewer words. The mirror pulsed at 5:30. Sirius appeared, and the difference in him from even this morning was extraordinary. Something had come back into his face, a fullness, like a room where the windows have been opened. He was still thin, still marked by Azkaban in the ways that 12 years leave marks, but his eyes were different. Open was the only word. "Done," he said. "I'm Harry. I'm legal. I have my wand back." He held it up, 12 inches, mahogany, the wand Harry recognized from old order photographs. Bones processed it herself. She shook my hand. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, nothing manic about it. "Mooney's with me. He's not dealing with this well. He keeps offering to make tea." "Let him," Harry said. "I am." A pause. "Dumbledore came to the ministry." "I know. He was here this morning. He shook my hand too." He looked, Sirius stopped. He looked old, Harry. Old and tired and sorry. I didn't want to feel bad for him, and I did anyway, which is annoying. "He is sorry," Harry said. "That doesn't fix it, but it's real." "Yeah." Sirius looked at him. "Guardianship paperwork goes through the ministry's family magic office. Should be complete by end of week." Bones expedited it. "Which means," he stopped. "Which means if you wanted to, you could come stay with me." Another stop. "I have a house. It's a terrible house. It's been empty for years and it's full of my mother's unpleasant portrait and various dark artifacts that need removing, but it's a house and you, I'd like that," Harry said. "Yeah? Yes. A week or two. I have things I need to finish here first." "Take the time you need." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "I went and saw James," he said. "After the ministry. I went to Godric's Hollow." His voice was careful, held level. "The house is still there. The part that was destroyed, it's still destroyed, they left it as a memorial. But the rest stands." A pause. "I sat there for a while. I talked to him. Told him." His jaw worked. He would have been so happy about today. That's the thing. He'd have been so bloody happy. Harry thought about the portrait. The way James had leaned forward and said, "There he is." "He was," Harry said. "He is. The portrait, he's there, Sirius. In the vault." Both of them. You can go. Sirius made a sound that was not a word. They'd want to see you, Harry said. Whenever you're ready. Right. Very quiet. Right. Okay. A breath. I'll go. Yes. I'll go. Take Lupin. Obviously. Sirius cleared his throat. Back to something more functional. Dumbledore mentioned tomorrow for a briefing. Yes. 12 o'clock, I said I'd come to Hogwarts. You should come too. To Hogwarts. It's July, Harry said. Most of the students are gone. And you're a legal person now, which means you're allowed in buildings. Being a legal person, Sirius said slowly, like testing the weight of the phrase. Allowed in buildings. He shook his head. God. All right. 12 o'clock. And Sirius. Harry hesitated. Not from uncertainty, he knew what he wanted to say, it just needed the right framing. The Triwizard Tournament. I'm going to need you operationally this year. Not just as family. I mean your skills. Your knowledge of dark magic and Death Eater operations. You were a fully trained Auror. I was, Sirius said. Something sharpened in his face, the same sharpness Harry had seen in the portrait's version of James, the combat attention behind the humor. What are you expecting? A trap, Harry said. One that's been in planning since before the tournament was announced. Someone's going to try to use the tournament to get to me specifically. I need to be more ready than they're planning for. Sirius was quiet for a moment. James would have said the same thing, he said. He'd have said it the same way, with the same expression. Another pause. All right. I'm in. Tell me what you need. Tomorrow, Harry said. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. After the mirror cleared, Harry went back upstairs and sat at his mother's desk and looked at the wall for a moment, just a moment, before picking up his quill. He wrote 3 pages of operational notes. His own, not his father's, his analysis of the tournament structure, the likely entry mechanism for whatever trap was coming, the gaps in the security arrangements that someone inside Hogwarts would need to exploit. He approached it as his father would have, and also differently from his father, because he had access to something James hadn't, for years of being inside the castle, knowing its rhythms, knowing the people. He knew the passwords and the passages and the politics of the staff room. He knew which ghosts talked and which teachers drank and which students had the institutional knowledge to be useful. He wasn't just a Potter. He was a Hogwarts student. That was its own kind of intelligence. He wrote until 7, then washed his hands and went down to dinner. The next morning he packed a bag, not for leaving but for the day. He was going to Hogwarts at noon. There were things to do before then. He went to see Fred and George first. They were at the inn in Diagon Alley, which turned out to double as unofficial Weasley base camp for anyone in London, and he found them in the small lounge off the breakfast room surrounded by prototypes and calculations with the focused energy of people who'd been up since dawn. He spent 2 hours with them. The decoy detonator activation sequence was fixable with a specific modification to the base charm's architecture, which he walked them through with reference to his mother's work, and watching Fred and George absorb it was something he found he genuinely enjoyed. They were fast, practical thinkers, the kind that jumped to implementation while you were still in the theory phase, and by the time he left they had 3 modified prototypes ready to test. In exchange, they gave him a demonstration of every product currently in development and an enthusiastic overview of their distribution concept, which was genuinely impressive, not just the creativity of the products but the business logic behind them, the understanding of their market, the kind of clear-eyed thinking about how to make something sustainable. Harry watched them move through it and thought, these 2 are going to be formidable. If you need a quiet distribution channel, Fred said, as Harry was leaving, something that doesn't go through official post and doesn't leave a paper trail, I'll need it before Christmas, Harry said. I'll be in touch. He walked back through Diagon Alley in the morning sun, bought a coffee from a small cart near the entrance, and thought about the afternoon. Dumbledore. Sirius. The Horcruxes. The tournament. The trap. He thought about Voldemort orienting toward him in the dark, the cold feeling from 2 nights ago, the compass needle sharpening. He thought about his father's notes on Tom Riddle and the mistakes brilliant men made when they stopped being curious. He thought about his mother's spell work, the layers of it, the recursive communication architecture that Hermione was already building, the shield variant that held past the point any standard protection would have given way. He thought about being 14. He'd been 14 for 3 days and it had been the most consequential 72 hours of his life so far, and he wasn't done. He was nowhere near done. He had a war coming and a trap to dismantle and a godfather to spend time with and his mother's complete spell work to absorb and his father's tactical history to finish reading and a conversation with Dumbledore that was going to require him to sit in a room and receive information about his own death, because he understood, from the partial things James had written, that the prophecy contained something about him and Voldemort that wasn't going to be comfortable to hear. He was going to hear it anyway. He was going to sit in Dumbledore's office this afternoon and look at the old man and tell him, "Tell me everything." And Dumbledore was going to, because Harry was now a person to him rather than a strategy, or at least was becoming one, and because Sirius was going to be in the room and Sirius had never been the kind of person who accepted selected information from anyone. His father had prepared all of this. 13 years of preparation, a dead man's last act of love for a son he'd only had for 15 months. And Petunia in an attic at 2 in the morning had completed it, had held a coin in both hands and thought of her sister and done the one thing James had asked her to do. Harry finished his coffee on the steps of Gringotts, standing in the sun, people flowing past him in both directions, the whole ordinary business of the wizarding world carrying on around him. He nodded at the goblin guards, who regarded him with the flat attention they gave everything, which he had come to understand as a form of respect. He thought about Ragnarok handing him the key with the stag grip, saying your father would have been very proud of you. That is not a thing I say. He was starting to believe it. Not proudly. Not with performance. Just as a fact, the way facts settle when you've examined them thoroughly and found them to be true. He walked back through the alley, up the steps of the Leaky Cauldron, through the bar where Tom gave him a nod that contained several things, and out into Muggle London, and caught the tube to King's Cross, and stood on the platform for a moment before he went through the barrier, because this was the place he always came back to, the hinge between worlds, the place where the ordinary and the extraordinary met in the form of a solid brick wall you had to walk through on faith. He walked through it. The Hogwarts Express was in the station, resting between terms, its engine cold and quiet. He stood on platform 9 3/4 in the summer silence and looked at it, and thought about September, and about everything that was going to happen between now and September, and about everything that was going to happen after. His watch said 11:50. He went to find Dumbledore. He went with his father's notes in his head and his mother's magic in his hands and Sirius's first message of freedom warm in his memory and 3 years of being a Hogwarts student in his bones, and he went without armor, without performance, without fear. He was Harry Potter, and he knew exactly who that was now. The game was already his to play. Chapter 5, Everything on the Table. Dumbledore's office in July was different from Dumbledore's office in the school year. The quality of the light changed without 300 students generating the ambient magical hum of a working castle. The portraits were more active, no competing noise to compete with, they talked more freely among themselves, and several of them looked up when Harry came through the door with genuine curiosity rather than the performed indifference they showed during term. Fawkes was on his perch and lifted his head when Harry entered, the flame-bright eyes tracking him with the specific attention phoenixes gave to things they found significant. Harry had been in this office 4 times. First year, the Mirror of Erist. Second year, Dobby's interference and its aftermath. Third year, Sirius and the Time Turner and the night that had ended with Pettigrew gone and Sirius taking a broom into the sky. Fourth year hadn't started yet. The office felt different today. Smaller, maybe, or just more honest. Sirius was already there. He was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, wearing clean clothes that actually fit. Someone, probably Lupin, had intervened on his wardrobe at some point in the last 24 hours, and he looked less like a fugitive than Harry had ever seen him. The openness in his face from the mirror last night was still there, that returned fullness, though his eyes when they moved around Dumbledore's office carried a quality Harry recognized from his father's notes on people who'd been in the war, the perpetual low-level assessment of a space, checking exits, checking for threats, the reflex that didn't fully turn off. Lupin was there too, sitting in one of the chairs in front of Dumbledore's desk, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. He looked up when Harry came in and the expression on his face was the same one Harry remembered from third year, warm and careful and complicated, the look of a man who chose his words in advance to avoid saying too much by accident. He looked tired. He also looked like someone who'd spent the last 24 hours being intermittently overwhelmed and was managing it with tea. "Harry," Lupin said. "Remus." Harry had decided, at some point in the last 3 days, to stop calling him Professor. He'd had 1 year of being his student. He had a lifetime of him being James Potter's closest surviving friend, and that relationship deserved its own terms. Lupin's eyes went slightly bright. He said nothing about the name. He didn't have to. Sirius crossed the room and put a hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly, not making a production of it, and then stepped back. It was the gesture of someone who'd been practicing restraint, who understood that 14 years of absence created a gap that physical affection couldn't simply bridge. Harry appreciated the calibration. Dumbledore came in through the door behind his desk, moving with the slightly deliberate pace of someone who'd been up since very early. He was in his usual robes but without the hat, which was a small thing that somehow made him look more approachable and less like a monument. He sat down, looked at the three of them, and seemed to take a long moment to gather something. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "You invited 2 of us," Sirius said. "Harry invited me." "I'm aware," Dumbledore said. "I should have invited you myself. I'm sorry I didn't." Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then sat down in the remaining chair. "All right," he said. "Let's hear it." Harry pulled his chair slightly forward, not so much to close distance as to be physically present in the conversation rather than peripheral to it. He looked at Dumbledore and said, "Everything. In the order it matters. Don't select for what you think I can handle." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the drawer of his desk and placed several objects on the surface, a pensieve, which Harry recognized, a sealed document, a small glass vial containing a swirling silver thread of memory, and a battered leather journal. "The journal first," Harry said, because he recognized the handwriting on the cover. Dumbledore looked at him. "That belonged to Tom Riddle," Harry said. "Or a version of it. I recognize the hand. I've seen his handwriting before, on a diary, in second year, the one that was controlling Ginny Weasley." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "That's a Horcrux." "Was," Dumbledore said. "I destroyed it. 3 months ago, in a location I will tell you about in a moment." He turned the journal over. "You've already connected the diary." "My father's notes mentioned the soul-splitting theory," Harry said. 7 was his intended number. The diary was 1. "The ones you've located, how many?" 2, with certainty. "A third is suspected." Dumbledore folded his hands. "Let me start from the beginning. Not Tom Riddle's beginning, you have enough context for that from your father's notes, I suspect. I mean the beginning of my understanding of the full scope of what he did to himself." He looked at Lupin and Sirius. "Some of this you know. Some you don't." "Tell it all," Sirius said. Dumbledore told it. He went for 40 minutes without stopping, which was not his usual style. His usual style involved pauses for effect and the careful spacing of revelations, managing the pace of information the way a conductor manages tempo. Today he didn't do that. He spoke in long, clear runs, laying out each piece in sequence: Riddle's school years, the chamber, the first Horcrux, the progression of the soul-splitting, the timeline of how he'd done it and what each act of murder had cost him in human terms, the way his magic had changed over years of self-mutilation. He talked about the objects. The diary, already destroyed. A ring, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, currently in Dumbledore's possession but not yet destroyed, the destruction of which he was working on, wearing a concealing charm on his right hand as he spoke that Harry now looked at directly, and Dumbledore, registering the look, removed. The hand underneath was blackened. Not burned, something deeper than a burn, a curse that had moved through the hand like rot, dark to the wrist. Lupin made a sharp sound. Sirius went very still. When did that happen? Harry said. 3 weeks ago, Dumbledore said. The ring was trapped. I was not as careful as I should have been and the curse was fast. Severus has been managing it. He looked at Harry's face. It is contained. It will not progress beyond the hand. He told you that it's contained, Harry said. Did he tell you it was permanent? A pause. He told me it was stable, Dumbledore said carefully. That's not the same thing, Harry said. No, Dumbledore agreed. It is not. Harry sat with this for a moment. His father's tactical notes had talked about the cost of the First War in terms of people, who they'd lost, what the losses had changed. Reading it had felt historical. This was present tense. Dumbledore was sitting across a desk with a dying hand, managing it, continuing to plan, not telling anyone how bad it was. What else? Harry said. A locket, Dumbledore said. Salazar Slytherin's locket. I believe it is one of the Horcruxes. I have located what I believe to be its former hiding place, a cave on the coast, protected with elaborate enchantments, but when I retrieved what I thought was the locket, I found, he reached into his robe and placed a small golden locket on the desk. Harry looked at it. Then looked at Dumbledore. That's not it, Harry said. No. Dumbledore opened the locket. Inside was a folded piece of parchment. He passed it to Harry. Harry read it. Written in cramped, urgent handwriting, to the Dark Lord. I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B. The office was very quiet. R.A.B., Sirius said. He said it slowly. Something moving behind his eyes. Regulus. Harry looked at him. My brother, Sirius said. His voice was completely controlled, which Harry understood now as the way Sirius handled things that were too large, by going very still and very flat. Regulus Arcturus Black. He was a Death Eater. He was 17 when he took the mark, my mother's favorite, everything I wasn't, he stopped. He died in 1979. We were told he tried to leave and Voldemort had him killed. A long pause. We were told. He found the Horcrux, Harry said. He stole it. He tried to destroy it. Or he died trying, Sirius said. We don't know if he succeeded, Dumbledore said. The real locket has not been located. I believe it may still exist. Grimmauld Place, Sirius said suddenly. When he died, when Voldemort had him killed, whatever he owned would have gone back to the house. My mother never threw anything away. He looked at Harry. I have to go through the house anyway. It's been empty for 12 years. If there's a chance, we'll go together, Harry said. When the guardianship paperwork is finalized. Sirius nodded. Processing. Harry watched him process it, the grief of a brother who'd been dismissed and turned out to have been braver than anyone knew, the specific pain of that, and underneath it the thing that Sirius was already doing, that Harry recognized from his father's notes as the Black family tactical mode, finding the angle, finding what could be used. What else? Harry said. A cup, Dumbledore said. Helga Hufflepuff's cup. I believe it's in the possession of Bellatrix Lestrange, held in her Gringotts vault. That's a problem for later, Harry said. What else? Nagini, Dumbledore said. Sirius and Lupin both looked up. Voldemort's snake, Harry said. His father's notes had mentioned Nagini in passing, not as a Horcrux. James hadn't known about that, but as a dangerous familiar. He made the snake a Horcrux. I believe so, yes. It would have been made later, after his original death and partial restoration. The soul at that point was so damaged that even an unintended act of murder may have been sufficient to, and the seventh, Harry said. You've listed the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the snake. That's 5. His own body as an anchor would be a 6th. What's the 7th? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The quality of the pause was different from the others. This was the pause of a man who had arrived at the thing he'd been building toward and was deciding, one final time, whether to say it. Tell him, Sirius said. Low and flat. Dumbledore looked at Harry. On the night Voldemort killed your parents and turned his wand on you, his soul was already unstable. Multiple fragmentations. The killing curse rebounded, you know this, and in that rebounding, in the moment of violent magical paradox, a fragment of his soul split away involuntarily. A pause. It had to go somewhere. Harry looked at him. The scar, Harry said. Yes. The office held its silence. Fawkes made a soft sound on his perch, not quite a note, not quite a word. I'm a Horcrux, Harry said. A part of Voldemort lives in you, yes, Dumbledore said. It does not control you. It is not you. But it is there, and it is connected to him, which is why you have his ability with Parseltongue, why you can occasionally sense his moods, why the connection between you, is why I had to die, Harry said. Another silence. In the prophecy, Harry said. The one you've been protecting. The one that says neither of us can live while the other survives. You've been building toward a scenario where I have to let him kill me. Briefly, Dumbledore said. The Horcrux in you would be destroyed. Your own soul is intact, whole, undamaged. The killing curse, which operates on the soul, would destroy the fragment that is his and leave yours untouched. You would survive. You think I would survive, Harry said. I believe, you believe, Harry said. You don't know. No, Dumbledore said. I do not know with certainty. Harry sat very still. He heard Sirius stand up, heard the scrape of the chair, heard Sirius move to the window with his back to the room in the way people do when they can't trust their face. He thought about it. The whole shape of it. Not with panic, not with the consuming terror it might have produced a week ago, before the protocols, before the vault, before 3 days of being himself completely. He thought about it the way his father would have thought about it, tactically, honestly, from every angle. You've been managing me toward a sacrifice you're not even certain will work, Harry said. That's what the suppressive wards were for. Keep me limited, keep me controllable, keep me from developing the kind of power and agency that might make me refuse the plan. He looked at Dumbledore. That's the truth of it. Dumbledore was quiet. Not cruelly, Harry said, and his voice was steady, was not cruel itself. Not because you don't care. Because you've decided the cost is acceptable and you're bad at telling people the truth when the truth might make them unmanageable. He paused. My father wrote that about you. Your father was right, Dumbledore said. It came out sounding like something that had been stuck for a long time and was now free. I am genuinely sorry, Harry. Not because the plan is wrong, I still believe it is the most likely path to ending this permanently, but because you deserve to know what you were being prepared for. Not managed toward. Prepared for. They are different things and I chose the one that served the plan rather than the one that served you. Sirius turned back from the window. His face was controlled and furious and present. Is there another way? He said. If he's a Horcrux, if the piece of Voldemort's soul can be extracted without killing Harry, I have been considering that, Dumbledore said. He looked at Sirius carefully. There are theoretical grounds for believing that if Voldemort were to attempt the killing curse at a moment when Harry was, not unprotected, but specifically protected by the same magic that saved him as an infant, love, Harry said. My mother's sacrifice. Yes. Sacrificial protection magic. If someone who loves you were to, he stopped. To die for me, Harry said. The way she did. In theory, the additional protection created by that sacrifice could serve as a buffer, could, in the moment of the curse's impact, extract and destroy the Horcrux fragment while leaving your soul completely intact. Dumbledore folded his hands. This is theory. It has never been tested. Neither has your version, Sirius said. No, Dumbledore agreed. Neither has mine. Harry looked at the desk. The objects on it, the destroyed journal, the damaged locket with Regulus's note, the battered ring with Dumbledore's blackened hand resting beside it. The sum of a war. The record of one man's destruction of himself in pursuit of something no one should want. I'm not going to walk into death for a theory, Harry said. Not mine or yours. I'm going to find a way that doesn't require anyone to die for me again. He looked at Dumbledore. That's not me refusing the mission. That's me telling you I'm going to approach it as a problem to solve rather than a fate to accept. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Yes, he said at last. I think that's right. You think? I think, he said, and there was something in his voice that Harry hadn't heard there before, a kind of relief, as if he'd been holding the plan alone for so long that having someone push against it felt less like resistance and more like support, that you may find something I have missed. I am old and I have been thinking about this from one direction for a very long time. Then think about it from another direction, Harry said. With me. That's what these meetings are for. Lupin, who had been quiet for a long time, set down his tea. I want to say something, he said. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at Harry with the expression Harry associated with careful men who decided to stop being careful. I knew your parents. I know what James would have said in this room. He would have had 10 solutions and none of them would have worked and he'd have been magnificent failing at all of them. He stopped. You're not doing that. You're sitting here with the worst information anyone has ever given a 14-year-old and you're treating it like a problem to solve. He looked at Harry steadily. Lily would have done that. Exactly like that. Stop, Sirius said, not harshly. He's going to cry. I'm not going to cry, Lupin said with dignity. You cried this morning when I made toast. The toast was a symbol of domestic normalcy that I haven't experienced in 12 years, Lupin said. That's completely different. Harry looked at the two of them and felt something happen in his chest that was not grief and not joy but the specific warmth of people who have survived enormous things together doing what survivors do, finding the absurd, finding each other, finding the next thing. He thought, I want this. I want this specific thing, these specific people, for as long as possible. The tournament, Harry said, returning them all to the room. We need to talk about it. He spent the next 2 hours laying out what he knew and suspected, with his father's notes as the framework and his own 4 years of Hogwarts knowledge as the texture. He did it efficiently, not dramatizing, treating the room as what it was, a room of capable adults and one capable adolescent, none of whom needed things managed for them. The Triwizard Tournament would begin in September. The tasks were designed to challenge wizarding skill across multiple domains. Entry was restricted to students of 17 and above, which meant Harry, at 14, should not be entered. Someone's going to enter me anyway, he said. Over the age line. That's part of the trap. The tournament winner has to complete a final task, something the organizers designed to end with the winner retrieving a trophy. If the trophy is a port key, it gets you anywhere the caster wants you, Sirius said. Somewhere Voldemort can get to you, Lupin said. Somewhere with the right materials for a resurrection ritual, Dumbledore said. His voice was carefully controlled. Blood from the enemy, taken by force. My blood specifically, Harry said. Because I carry the Horcrux. The fragment of his soul. He'll think it makes the ritual more powerful. It would, Dumbledore said. That's not inaccurate. It would also, Harry said slowly, thinking it through, mean that the moment his blood and mine are combined in a ritual, the Horcrux fragment in me is connected to his restored body. Which creates a different kind of connection than the one we have now. Explain, Dumbledore said, leaning forward. Right now the connection is passive. I sometimes feel his moods. He can't actively use me, he doesn't have a body. If he restores himself using my blood, the connection becomes active and bidirectional. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Which means I can feel him. But it also means he can feel me. And if the Horcrux in me is now anchored to his restored body, then destroying that body destroys the anchor. The room was quiet. That's, Lupin started. Theoretical, Harry said. I know. But it's a different theory than the ones we have. It's a better theory, Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was wholly unguarded, the specific astonishment of an expert encountering a perspective they hadn't considered. If his restoration incorporates your blood, the piece of his soul in you becomes doubly anchored, to you, and to him. In theory, destroying one anchor could force the fragment to migrate fully to the other. If we destroy him, Harry said, the fragment in me has nowhere to go but into the void with him. That is, Dumbledore stopped. Harry. That is significantly more elegant than my solution. It still requires him to restore himself, Sirius said. Which means letting the trap play out far enough that he gets to the ritual. Not necessarily, Harry said. It requires me to be in the ritual. It doesn't require me to be in it on his terms. He let that sit for a moment. You want to control when it happens, Lupin said. I want to control the conditions, Harry said. Not the location he chooses, not his preparation, but my state when I arrive. My protection layers. Who's there and in what position? He looked around the room. He thinks I'm going to arrive as a prisoner, caught in a trap, terrified. He's planning for that version of events. A pause. He doesn't know about the protocols. He doesn't know I've spent 3 days becoming something he's never measured. He felt the wards break, Dumbledore said. He knows the suppressive enchantments are gone. He knows I'm not suppressed, Harry agreed. He doesn't know what that means yet. He's been fighting a 15-month-old child in his head for 13 years. He has no idea what I actually am. Sirius was looking at him with an expression that was complicated and proud and slightly destroyed all at once. James would have absolutely lost his mind, he said quietly. Good or bad? Good, Sirius said. Completely, utterly good. Harry nodded once. Then here's what I need for the tournament. He looked at Dumbledore. I need you to let me appear to be a normal student. Don't brief the staff beyond what's necessary. The person entering me in the tournament, whoever Voldemort's using, whatever Death Eater is in position at Hogwarts, they need to think everything is proceeding as planned. You want to be bait, Sirius said, with the tone of someone who profoundly objected to something and was going to voice that objection in full. I want to be a trap, Harry said. There's a difference. Bait doesn't know it's there. I'm going in with complete situational awareness, the full communication network Hermione is building, your operational support, and 4 years of knowing that castle better than whoever's infiltrating it. He met Sirius's eyes. I'm not walking into anything. I'm pulling something into me. Sirius sat back. Rubbed a hand over his face. Looked at Lupin. He's right, Lupin said. He's completely right and I hate it. Yeah, Sirius said. Me too. He looked at Harry. I'm going to need you to check in with me. Every day. Non-negotiable. Every day, Harry agreed. And the communication network Hermione's building, she'll have a functional prototype before September. She's already started. Sirius looked at Dumbledore. And I will support this, Dumbledore said. With everything I have. He looked at Harry. I want to be clear about something, Harry. Not as a strategist. He paused, finding the word. As something resembling a person who cares about you, which I have always been even when I was not showing it adequately. If at any point this becomes untenable, if the risk calculus changes, you tell me. Immediately. We adjust. Agreed, Harry said. And the Horcruxes we know about, the locket, the cup, Nagini, we handle them before the final task, Harry said. Not during. Before. I want as few anchors as possible before I go into that ritual. Nagini is last, she's Voldemort's most direct protection and we don't move on her until we're ready to move on him. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of someone watching a general plan a campaign. The ring, he said. He looked at his blackened hand. I should have asked for help. The trap on the ring, Severus has been managing the curse but there's a counter-curse, Harry said. In my mother's spell work. He looked at Dumbledore directly. She designed a counter to exactly this type of rotting curse. She called it a soul anchor degradation charm in her notes. She was working on it in 1980 after she identified the theory of what Voldemort had done to himself. She never published it because she didn't want to explain the context. He paused. I'll need Snape's help to implement it correctly. The potion component is beyond my current level. Dumbledore stared at him. It won't reverse the damage already done, Harry said. But it will stop the progression. Your hand will stay as it is. He met Dumbledore's eyes. She was trying to figure out how to fight him, even then. Even before the end. For a moment Dumbledore was simply an old man who had known Lily Potter and had underestimated her in some of the ways that people underestimate brilliant young women and now knew the full weight of that underestimation. Yes, he said. His voice was very quiet. She was. They broke at 3:30. Lupin and Sirius had a safe house in London, not Grimmauld Place yet, that needed to be cleared before it was habitable, and they left together, the two of them moving through the castle corridor with the quality of people still learning how to walk in a world where they were allowed to exist in full. Harry watched them go and felt the same warmth from earlier, the survivor warmth. The specific texture of this is worth protecting. Dumbledore walked him down to the entrance hall. One more thing, Dumbledore said, as they reached the doors. He stopped. Turned to face Harry with the full weight of his attention. I owe you an apology. Not a qualified one, not one with context attached. A simple one. He looked at Harry. I took your childhood from you. Not all of it, the Dursleys and the circumstances of the war share that responsibility, but the parts one controlled, I used for the plan instead of for you. I am sorry. Harry looked at him. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about Petunia in the attic. He thought about the 14 wards dissolving in the night like things that should have dissolved years ago. He thought about what anger would cost and what it would buy. I know, he said. I'm going to need you to spend the next year proving it rather than saying it. Yes, Dumbledore said. That's fair. You've got a lot of credit to earn back. I'm aware. But, Harry said, you came today. You said everything. Without managing it. He looked at the old man. That counts. Dumbledore seemed to feel this land somewhere important, the way things land when they're offered genuinely rather than strategically. He nodded once. Thank you, he said. Harry went down the steps. The grounds were summer empty, the lake still and bright, the sky the particular blue of Scottish July. He walked through the grounds without hurrying, through the gate, toward Hogsmeade, where he'd flew back to Diagon Alley. He let the afternoon settle around him. He thought about everything on the desk upstairs. The objects, the plan, the prophecy. The Horcrux in his scar. He touched it briefly, the reflex, the lightning bolt that had defined his visible identity since he was old enough to be recognized in public. He'd hated it, loved it, been embarrassed by it, been exhausted by the weight of it. He thought about it differently now. Not a mark of victimhood. Not a mark of destiny in the romantic sense. Just a record of something that had happened, a piece of a soul that wasn't his, sitting in a space in his forehead, finite, temporary, already losing its grip on a boy who'd spent 3 days becoming himself. He was going to handle it. Not alone, with Sirius, with Lupin, with Hermione and Ron, with Snape who needed a reason to pick a side and had just been given one, with Dumbledore who was old and brilliant and finally being honest. With Fred and George and their distribution network and their impractical genius. With Petunia who had found a letter in an attic and done something brave and quiet in the middle of the night. With James and Lily, in a vault under London, who had prepared for this so carefully that their son had everything he needed even though they'd had 15 months to give it to him. He was going to handle it, and it was going to be hard, and he was not afraid. He pushed open the gate of Hogwarts and walked toward Hogsmeade in the afternoon sun, and behind him the castle stood in its summer silence, patient as it always was, waiting for September. In the pocket of his jacket the gold coin rested, Stag on one side and Doe on the other, both of them still. The seal had broken. Everything else was forward. Chapter 6, the opening move. The last week of July moved differently than any week Harry could remember. Not slower, not faster, just with more texture. More presence. The way time feels when you're actually living inside it rather than waiting for it to be over. He woke up early every morning and worked at his mother's desk until the house stirred around him. He made progress through her spellwork that would have taken a Hogwarts student years under normal circumstances, but the protocols had given him the foundations and the foundations made everything else coherent in the way a key makes a lock coherent, not easy, but legible. He could see what she was building. He could follow the thinking. Hermione came every other day. She brought her own notebooks now, dense with the communication network architecture she was constructing from Lily's Protean framework, and they worked alongside each other in the easy silence of people with a shared technical language. She'd looped Ron in, fully, as Harry had suggested, and Ron's first response had been to draw a diagram of the network structure in chess notation, which was oblique and completely accurate, and Hermione had looked at it and revised 2 of her foundational assumptions. Ron himself came on the days Hermione didn't, and those days were different. Less technical. They played chess. Ron won every game, which Harry accepted as a useful lesson in the gap between tactical thinking and actual chess mastery, and talked about the tournament, about school in September, about what it was going to be like going back with everything changed. Ron took the changed everything with the specific equanimity of someone whose family had been in the wizarding world long enough to understand that magical inheritance events happened and tended to alter things significantly. "Does it feel weird?" Ron asked one afternoon, moving a knight with the casual precision of someone for whom chess was a native language. "Knowing all the things you know." "Sometimes," Harry said. "It's more like remembering something I always knew but couldn't access. Less like learning. Like when you suddenly remember a word you couldn't think of. Exactly like that. Except the word is also a complete theory of spell construction." Ron considered this. Moved a bishop. Check. Harry looked at the board. You can see the counter, Ron said. "I can see 3 counters," Harry said. "2 of them are wrong." Harry looked at the board for another moment, then moved his king. Ron immediately moved a rook and the game was over. Harry looked at the wreckage of his position with something like admiration. "You didn't teach me the right counter," Harry said. "You didn't ask," Ron said pleasantly. "You have to ask." Harry thought about this. That's actually good advice beyond chess. Most things are advice beyond chess, Ron said. That's the whole point of chess. The mirror check with Sirius happened every evening at 7. Sometimes it was brief, 10 minutes, status update, nothing new to report. Sometimes it went longer, and the longer ones were the ones Harry valued more, because they were less operational and more personal, Sirius finding his footing as a free man and as something approaching family, both of them learning the distance between them and how to close it. Sirius was going through Grimmauld Place methodically, with Lupin's help and Dumbledore's occasional consultancy on specific dark objects. The house was a genuine horror, years of the Black family's worst instincts preserved in amber, dark artifacts on every surface and his mother's portrait screaming whenever anyone came too close to the front hall. But underneath all of it, visible to Sirius in the way a childhood home is always visible even under its worst versions, was a structure that could be made livable. They hadn't found the locket. "We've been through the drawing room twice," Sirius said on the 5th day. "I know it should be there. If Regulus brought it back here, it would have gone into the family collection, and my mother never threw anything away, but there are enough concealment charms on this house that something small could be hidden almost anywhere." "Creature," Harry said. A pause. "What?" "Your house elf," Harry said. "The one who's been there the whole time. If Regulus came back to the house with something and wanted it hidden, he would have told Creature," Sirius said slowly. "Merlin. He would have told Creature." He looked off to the side, the way he did when he was thinking hard. "Creature hates me." "He's not going to, he loved Regulus," Harry said. "My father wrote about the Black family elf. He said Regulus was the only member of the family who treated Creature well. If you ask him about Regulus rather than about the locket, I approach it through the grief rather than the object," Sirius said. He was quiet for a moment. "He won't talk to me." "He might talk to me," Harry said. "I'm not a Black. I don't have the history." "You'd do that." "I'll come to Grimmauld Place as soon as the guardianship paperwork clears," Harry said. "We'll do it properly." Sirius looked at him with the expression Harry was beginning to recognize as the one Sirius wore when he was trying not to be overwhelmed by a specific thing and not fully succeeding. "You know what James used to say about you," he said. "When you were a baby. He used to say that you looked at everything like you were already thinking about it, even at 2 weeks old, and Lily said he was projecting and he said no, watch, and you would look at him and you could see the gears. The mind working." "He was projecting," Harry said. "He absolutely was," Sirius agreed. "But he wasn't wrong." The guardianship paperwork cleared on the 1st of August. Grimmauld Place was everything Sirius had described and then some. Harry stepped through the front door, the house having been revealed to him by Sirius with the specific formality of someone sharing a secret keeper location, and stood in the entrance hall while Lupin pulled the curtains closed over the shrieking portrait with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 4 times already today. The house smelled like years, dust and old magic and the particular staleness of closed rooms, with underneath it something else, something older, the residue of decades of powerful magic worked in confined spaces. Creature appeared before Harry had taken 5 steps into the hall. He was old, as house elves went, older than Dobby had been, the kind of old that had compressed rather than diminished, wearing a filthy rag and regarding Harry with enormous, clouded eyes in which there was nothing of the deference most house elves performed and everything of someone assessing a stranger on their own terms. Sirius watched from the doorway, arms crossed, jaw set. Harry crouched down to be closer to Creature's eye level, which was not a thing he'd seen adults do with house elves and which seemed to register. "You're Creature," he said. "The blood trader's guest comes to Creature's house," Creature said, in the rasping low voice of something very old. "Creature does not want the blood trader's guests in Mistress's house." "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry about the house. I know it's not what you'd have wanted." Creature's eyes narrowed. "The guest is sorry." A pause. "Creature has heard sorry." "I'm not here to take anything," Harry said. "I'm here because I want to talk to you about Regulus." The silence that followed was complete. Sirius went very still in the doorway. Lupin, who had been moving toward the kitchen, stopped. Kreacher looked at Harry. The cloudiness in his eyes had changed, not cleared exactly, but shifted, the way light changes in a room when a window is opened in an adjacent space. "Master Regulus," he said. "He was brave," Harry said. "My father wrote about the Black family, he knew your family's history. He wrote that Regulus was brave at the end. That he found something and tried to stop it." Kreacher made a sound that was nothing like any sound Harry expected from a house elf. Low and cracked and old, the sound of grief that had been held alone for 15 years without anyone to witness it. He pressed both hands over his enormous ears and rocked once, forward and back. "Master Regulus gave Kreacher a task," he said. "Master Regulus told Kreacher to take it. To hide it. To keep it safe until he, another sound. Master Regulus did not come back." "I know," Harry said quietly. "Kreacher kept it," the elf said. "Kreacher has always kept it. Mistress is gone now and the blood traitor has the house and Kreacher keeps it still, keeps it for Master Regulus, because Master Regulus said." He stopped. A long, fractured pause. "Master Regulus said to destroy it. Kreacher tried. Kreacher tried everything. Kreacher could not." The hair on Harry's arms rose. "You have the locket," Harry said. Kreacher looked at him. Then, slowly, reached into the rag he was wearing, and produced it. Slytherin's locket, gold and green, heavy, the serpentine S on its face. Harry felt the wrongness of it immediately, a coldness, not physical, not temperature, but something deeper, the specific cold of a thing that contains something that should not be in the world. Sirius made a sound from the doorway. "Kreacher tried to destroy it," the elf said again, holding it out. "For 15 years Kreacher tried. Nothing worked. It does not break. It does not burn. It does not, I know," Harry said. He took the locket carefully, not touching the S, holding it by its chain. "I know how to destroy it. I promise you it will be destroyed. Regulus's task will be completed." Kreacher looked at him. The grief in those enormous eyes was ancient and personal and completely real. "Master Regulus was good," the elf said. "They say he was a Death Eater, but Master Regulus was good. He was frightened, but he was good." "He was," Harry said. "He was good and he was brave and he went into something terrible alone and he did what he set out to do. The locket is in my hands. His task is going to be finished." Kreacher's eyes moved from Harry to the locket and back. Then, with the deliberateness of someone setting down a thing they've been carrying for a very long time, the old elf straightened slightly. "Kreacher will help," he said. "If the young master needs Kreacher. Kreacher will help." Harry looked at the elf for a moment. Thought about Dobby, about loyalty as something chosen, fierce and personal. "Thank you, Kreacher," he said. "I'll remember that." He stood. Handed the locket to Sirius without ceremony. Sirius took it. Looked at it. His brother's name was not on it, it was Slytherin's locket, cold and old and wrong, but Regulus's hands had touched it, had stolen it, had given it to an elf with instructions to keep it safe, and that history was in it the way history is always in objects that carry weight. "Regulus," Sirius said, quietly, to no one in particular. Then he handed it to Dumbledore, who had arrived, as he had a tendency to arrive in Harry's life, at precisely the moment things became relevant. Dumbledore stood in the entrance hall of Grimmauld Place with Slytherin's locket in his undamaged left hand and looked at it for a long moment. "I will need a day to prepare the correct method of destruction," he said. "This cannot be opened with a standard charm, it will require a form of magic that is both destructive and personal." He looked at Harry. "A basilisk fang would work. I happen to know the location of certain remains." "In the chamber," Harry said. "Yes. I know where they are." Of course you do, Lupin said, with the tone of a man who'd been revising his expectations upward for 2 weeks and was running out of room. The destruction of the locket happened 2 days later, in the Chamber of Secrets. Harry went in first, because the passage was keyed to Parseltongue and he was the one who had it. He hadn't been back since second year. The chamber looked the same, vast and cold and serpentine, the stone faces of Slytherin looming in the torchlight, but he was different enough that the familiar strangeness of it landed differently. Not with the fear-flavored awe of a 12-year-old. With the clear-eyed assessment of someone who understood what they were looking at. The basilisk was still there. It would be for years, its body enormous even in death, the venom in its hollow fangs still potent enough to be dangerous. He extracted a fong with the specific care his father's notes recommended for dangerous magical remains, using a levitation charm and a thick lead-lined case Dumbledore had brought. Dumbledore destroyed the locket. Harry watched the process. The old man was precise and controlled, the method complex and layered, drawing on something old and powerful. When the locket broke, it broke with a sound that was not quite sound, a resonance that Harry felt in his chest, and from it came, briefly, for just a moment, something that screamed. Not a person's scream. The sound of a soul fragment without a body, without an anchor, dissolving into nothing. Harry held the sound in his chest for a moment after it was gone. Thought about the one in his scar. Thought about the plan, his version, the one he was building toward September. He was not afraid of it. He was ready for it. The 6th of August arrived like any other morning, and Harry was at his desk at 5:30 when the mirror pulsed with unusual urgency. Not serious. The pulse pattern was different, 2 short, 1 long, which was the code Ron had established for significant development, not emergency. He picked it up. Ron's face appeared, looking like someone who had been up all night and was running on the specific energy of a very large discovery. I finished the chess diagram, Ron said. At 5 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. Harry, I finished the chess diagram of the communication network and I found a problem. He held up the parchment, his chess notation, the dense interconnected map of how the protean framework would route information between its nodes. Look at the center. Harry looked. The center of Ron's diagram had a gap, not an empty space, but a space that was structurally necessary for the network to function, a hub node that had no assigned piece. The network needs a central anchor, Ron said. Something that the recursive links can route back to. Without it, the whole thing is a series of isolated chains. Information moves through it but it doesn't consolidate. There's no central intelligence. He looked at Harry. Your mum designed it around the assumption that there would be a central anchor and she didn't specify what it was because she was designing it as a resistance tool and the anchor would naturally be the leader of the resistance. Harry looked at the gap in the diagram. Me, he said. You, Ron said. The anchor has to be you. But the way she designed the security architecture, the anchor is also the most visible node, Harry said. If someone gets access to the network, they get access to everyone, and they trace it back to the center. Yeah. But if the anchor is me, Harry said slowly, and the connection is blood-keyed rather than object-keyed, then accessing it requires access to you specifically, Ron said. And he gestured at the general concept of Harry. You. Harry turned this over. His mother's network, designed for the First War, with a gap at the center that was now his. It's elegant, he said. It's terrifying, Ron said. Both, Harry said. It's both. They worked on it for 2 hours, Harry pulling out his mother's base framework and Ron cross-referencing against his diagram, until they found the specific modification needed, a blood-keyed anchor charm that his mother had actually sketched in the margin of her 5th-year notes and never developed because she'd run out of time. Harry looked at the sketch for a long moment, the quick pencil marks of a 16-year-old who'd seen something that needed doing and filed it for later. She knew, he said. She planned ahead, Ron said. Like father, yes, Harry said. He wrote it up and sent a copy to Hermione by mirror. Her response came back in 20 minutes. She'd been awake, apparently, working on a separate section of the framework, and it was 3 pages long and began with "This changes the entire security architecture in a way that's significantly better than what I had. How did I miss this?" and ended with "also brilliant." Harry set it aside and went down for breakfast. On August 10th, he saw Snape. Not at Hogwarts. In Diagon Alley, by chance, or by the specific non-chance of Diagon Alley being a small enough world that 2 people who moved in the same circles would eventually occupy the same street. Snape was outside the apothecary with a list and the expression of someone engaged in a task they found genuinely interesting, which was the only time Harry had seen Snape's face look naturally open. Harry stopped. "Professor." Snape looked up. The professional mask assembled itself, as it always did, but slower than usual, like he was choosing to engage the mechanism rather than having it as a reflex. "Potter. I need to ask you something," Harry said. "Apparently you always need to ask me something," Snape said. Harry ignored this as not actually hostile. "My mother's counter-curse for the Soul Anchor degradation. The one for Dumbledore's hand. You'll have seen his hand by now. He told you the full picture?" Snape's eyes moved to him and held. "He did," he said. 3 days ago. He didn't tell you about the counter-curse in her notes," Harry said. "He doesn't know about it yet. I mentioned it to him but I haven't had the chance to sit down and go through the specific methodology. I need your help with the potion component." "You need my help," Snape repeated. "You're the best potions practitioner alive who isn't doing dark magic," Harry said. "That's not flattery. My mother wrote that in her notes. She referenced the potions her friend was developing when they were at school as the basis for her own calculations, which means she used your work. Your early work." Something moved in Snape's face. "Very controlled. Very small. She annotated my work. She built on it," Harry said. "There are 3 places in the 6th year notes where she writes, in brackets, in pencil, S's equation, modified. Always modified because she found a way to make it more efficient." He paused. "She had a lot of respect for your thinking." Snape looked at him for a moment that was longer than was comfortable. Harry held it without flinching. He'd learned, in the weeks since his birthday, that discomfort was often just the feeling of 2 honest things being in the same space, and the answer was not to end it prematurely. "The potion component," Snape said at last, "will require a 2-day preparation. There are 3 ingredients that will need to be sourced specially." He looked at his list. Then at Harry. "I will need the relevant pages from her notes." "I'll bring them tomorrow," Harry said. "I will be at Hogwarts." "Then I'll come to Hogwarts." Snape looked at him for another moment. "The counter-curse," he said. "If it works, it'll work," Harry said. "She knew what she was doing." "Yes," Snape said. "She did." He turned back to the apothecary with the deliberate air of someone who had concluded a conversation. Then stopped. "Potter." Harry waited. "The way she built on other people's work," Snape said, not looking at him. "She always credited it. In the margin. Every time." A pause. "Most people don't. Most people take what they need and move on and don't." Another stop. He turned slightly. "She was careful about that. About giving things their due." "I know," Harry said. "I've read the notes." "Then you know it's not a small thing." "No," Harry said. "It's not." Snape went into the apothecary. Harry stood on the street for a moment, thinking about the specific way that grief and respect and the complicated architecture of a friendship that had broken at a vulnerable point in both people's lives could exist alongside each other in a man without ever resolving. He thought about his mother at 15, in the margin of her spell work, writing S's equation, modified in pencil, doing it every time, because she was careful about giving things their due. He thought he understood her better every day. He thought he would keep understanding her better for the rest of his life, and that this was a gift. The 6th of the final week of August. Harry was packed. His room at Privet Drive, the real room, the one he'd had for a month, the nautical wallpaper and the lamp and the window, was slightly emptier than it had been, the books redistributed between his trunk and a secondary bag, his mother's spellwork notes organized into a leather folder Hermione had bought him without comment and which he'd been using as his primary working document. The decoy detonator prototypes from Fred and George were in a sealed box in the bottom of the trunk. The communication network tokens, small, flat discs keyed to the anchor charm in his blood, one for each node, were in a drawstring bag in his jacket pocket. Sirius was coming at noon. Harry came downstairs at 9 and found Petunia in the kitchen with the ironing board out, working through a pile of shirts with the focused economy she brought to all domestic tasks. He made tea, for both of them, automatically, and she accepted the cup without comment, which was its own kind of communication. He sat at the kitchen table. She ironed. The radio was on at a low volume, the morning news from a station she'd listened to for as long as Harry could remember, the same voices he'd woken up to as a child through 2 floors and a cupboard door. "I'll write," he said. "When I'm at school. I know I haven't before. I mean, there were letters when something was urgent or wrong, but I've never just written because it didn't occur to you that I'd want to hear," Petunia said. She set the iron down. Looked at him. "I understand why." "I'll write anyway," he said. "If you want." "I want," she said. Brief and flat and completely real. He nodded. She picked up the iron again. "Your mother used to write me from school," Petunia said, after a moment. "Every 2 weeks. I stopped writing back in her 3rd year. I was 17, she stopped. I was too proud and too hurt and I let the correspondence die." She ironed a sleeve with more force than strictly necessary. She kept writing for another year after that. Even without replies. "She kept trying," Harry said. "She always kept trying." The iron moved steadily. "It was one of the things I couldn't stand about her, when I was being terrible about it. She never gave up on people." A pause. "I understand it better now." Harry sat with his tea in the yellow light of the kitchen and thought about how much of his mother existed in the spaces between what people said about her, in Petunia's complicated silences, in Snape's careful credits in the margin, in Dumbledore's expression when Harry had told him about the counter-curse, in the vault portrait crying without embarrassment, in 15-year-old handwriting building recursive communication frameworks in pencil because she saw something that needed doing and she was going to do it even if no one asked. "I'll write," he said again. Petunia didn't reply. She didn't need to. Sirius arrived at noon in a Muggle taxi, which appeared to have given the driver an interesting morning. He got out on the pavement outside number 4 in the August sun and looked at the house with the expression of a man who'd heard about a place and was now meeting it and finding the reality both smaller and more significant than expected. He knocked. Petunia opened the door. They looked at each other, Sirius black, finally legal, still with the angles of Azkaban in his face, but something returned to his eyes. Petunia Dursley, straight-backed, precise, the woman who had in a single act of quiet love changed everything. "You're the one who did it," Sirius said. "The coin." "I am," Petunia said. "Thank you," he said. "I know you don't know me. But thank you anyway. For what you did for him." Petunia looked at him for a moment. Something moved briefly in her face, the recognition of one person who had been kept away from something they loved by circumstances they'd constructed themselves seeing that same thing in another. "He was James Potter's friend," she said, finally. "James Potter was a decent man. I expect you were too." "I tried to be," Sirius said. She stepped back. "Come in, then," she said. "There's lunch." Sirius looked at Harry over her shoulder with an expression of complete bewilderment. Harry shrugged. Sirius followed Petunia into the kitchen and Harry brought the trunk downstairs. Lunch at Privet Drive with Sirius Black was one of the stranger experiences of Harry's life, and his life had been genuinely strange for a long time. Sirius sat at the kitchen table and ate a sandwich and talked to Petunia about Lily with the specific openness of someone who'd had no one to talk to about Lily for 13 years and had finally found someone who also needed to talk about Lily. Petunia, who did not talk about Lily to anyone, talked about Lily. Not extensively, not with ease, but she talked, and Sirius listened, and Harry ate his lunch and watched two very different people find unexpected common ground in the person they'd both lost. Dudley came in halfway through, looked at Sirius, looked at Harry, and said, "Is this the one who, my godfather?" Harry said. Dudley looked at Sirius for another moment. "Cool hair," he said, with the specific verbal limitation of a teenage boy performing neutrality, and went back out again. Sirius looked at Harry. "Cool hair," he said. "That's probably the nicest thing he said to anyone outside the family in a while," Harry said. "I'll take it." They left at 2:00. The trunk loaded in the cab, Hedwig on Harry's shoulder briefly before she took to the air. She would find them, she always did, and Harry stood on the pavement outside number 4 and looked at the house for a moment. The ordinary house on the ordinary street. The place he'd been waiting to leave for 4 years. He wasn't leaving it with the relief he'd expected. He was leaving it with something more like completion. Like a chapter that had ended properly, on the right note, rather than trailing off. What Petunia had done in the attic had changed something in the nature of the place, not what had happened there, that was permanent and carried its own weight, but what it was now, what it meant now. He could think about those years and the cupboard and the particular shape of that childhood, and they were real, they had weight, and they were also not the last word. He thought, the last word is what you do next. He got in the taxi. The sixth protocol activated at 3:17 in the afternoon. Harry didn't know it was happening until it had already happened. He and Sirius were in the taxi moving through the London suburbs toward Grimmauld Place when he felt it, not in his scar, not externally, but in the coin in his jacket pocket, which had been cool and quiet since the night of his birthday and which now pulsed once, warm, with a quality he recognized because he'd been given the language for all of it, the final contingency. The one his father had designed last, had encoded deepest, had never expected to need. He pulled out the coin. It was warm and bright, the gold deeper than it should have been in the grey London afternoon. "What's that?" Sirius said. "The last protocol," Harry said. "I thought," he paused. "I thought they were done. After the wards broke. But there's one more." He looked at the coin. The sixth protocol was not a ward or a document or a legal instrument. His father had encoded it into the coin itself, the deepest layer, the one that could only activate when the conditions were right, not any specific conditions, but a threshold, when Harry was safe, free, legally protected, surrounded by people who loved him, moving toward rather than away from what was coming. When he was ready. James Potter had set a condition that was not tactical but human. His son had to actually be okay before the last thing activated. Harry understood this, and felt it go through him like a struck bell. "Sirius," he said. "Pull over. We're on the pull over." Sirius told the driver to stop. The taxi pulled to the curb on a residential street in South London, ordinary afternoon traffic moving past. Harry got out. He stood on the pavement and held the coin, and it pulsed again, warmer, and then something happened that was not in the vault, not physical, not a wards break or a document or a legal instrument. Something that moved through the magical channels his father had built and went to every person who was supposed to receive it. He felt it go. He felt the reach of it, further than the house, further than Surrey, further than London. He felt it find Sirius behind him and Lupin across the city and Dumbledore at Hogwarts and Moody in whatever safe house he used and Minerva McGonagall who was in her office at Hogwarts grading something and who would feel it land and set down her quill. He felt it find the old goblin families who had sworn loyalty to the Potters in the First War, the ones his father had noted in the journal, the ones who had been waiting without quite knowing what they were waiting for. He felt it find order members who were still alive and still active and who had been told to listen for exactly this signal if it ever came. He felt it find all of them simultaneously, and what it sent them was not a message in words. It was a recording, his father's voice, encoded in magic, the specific frequency of James Potter's magical signature, carrying a statement that he'd prepared on the last night of his life and never expected to be the opening move of his son's war. Harry didn't hear the words. He hadn't been given the recording, that was not how James had set it up. The recording was for the people who needed to hear it, not for Harry, because Harry already had the letter. But he felt the shape of what it contained. The acknowledgement that the war had never ended, that it was coming back, that the protections and the careful quiet of 14 years had always been a pause rather than a conclusion. The declaration that the Potter family stood, that their allies should stand with them, that the enemy had made the mistake of assuming a boy who survived could be kept small indefinitely. And underneath all of that, the thing that James had wanted to say to everyone who'd known him and lost him and tried to go on without him: I made provisions. He's ready. Stand with him. The coin went cool in Harry's hand. Done. Sirius had gotten out of the taxi. He was standing on the pavement with his hand pressed flat against his chest, and his face was doing something that had no name, the expression of a man who had just heard his dead best friend's voice for the first time in 13 years and did not know whether to laugh or collapse. He did neither. He stood very still with his hand on his chest and his eyes bright. He sounded like himself, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. He always does. A pause. A car went past. London continued, perfectly unaware. They'll all be contacting Dumbledore in about 10 minutes, Sirius said. Probably. And the Ministry will have registered the magical broadcast, something that size can't go undetected. Let them register it, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Fudge is going to, let him, Harry said. He's going to want to meet me eventually. That's fine. I'd like to meet him too. Sirius made the sound that was approximately a laugh. You sound like James. I know. It's getting less startling. Good. They stood on the pavement for another moment. The afternoon was warm. Hedwig appeared from somewhere above them, circling once before settling on the taxi's wing mirror with the proprietary ease she brought to all surfaces she decided were hers. The driver, who had been sitting very patiently, looked at the owl on his mirror and decided not to comment. Harry looked at the coin one more time. Both sides now, the stag and the doe, both clear, both still, the warmth gone out of it. It was just a coin now. A beautiful, old, heavy coin, the record of 4 hours on a wedding night when two people argued about charms and laughed and built something together, not knowing what it would one day need to do. He put it in his pocket. He thought about the board. The tournament in September. The tasks. The trap he was building into the trap. The communication network Hermione would have fully operational before October. The locket sitting in a lead case on the kitchen table of Grimmauld Place waiting to be destroyed. The cup in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault that would need to come later. Nagini at the end. The restoration ritual he intended to be ready for on his own terms. He thought about Dumbledore's office and the pensieve and the prophecy and the sound of a soul fragment dissolving into nothing when the locket had broken, and about the one in his scar which was going to be last and which he was going to handle in the way his father had prepared for, not by accepting death but by refusing it so thoroughly that the soul fragment had nowhere to hide. He thought about his mother's spellwork and the protean anchor running through his blood and Ron's chess diagram and Hermione's 3 pages of revision and Fred and George in Diagon Alley saying done at the same time. He thought about Remus Lupin making tea when things were too large and Sirius standing on a pavement in South London with his hand on his chest. He thought about Snape in an apothecary with an ingredient list and pencil credits in a margin. He thought about Petunia at an ironing board saying I want in 2 words like a whole conversation. He thought about a coin placed on a floor in the dark. He thought, I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. I know who I am and what I have and what's coming. He thought, let it come. Right, Harry said. He looked at Sirius. Let's go. To Grimmauld Place, Sirius said. To Grimmauld Place, Harry agreed. We've got a locket to destroy and a house to make livable, and at some point I want to eat an actual meal before Dumbledore calls to tell us that half the wizarding world just received a broadcast from a man who's been dead for 13 years and everyone is losing their minds. Sirius grinned. A full one, the kind that arrived without warning and changed his whole face, the young man who'd been buried under everything coming briefly to the surface. James would have been absolutely insufferable about this, he said. He'd have wanted to watch Fudge's face when the penny dropped. I'm going to watch Fudge's face when the penny drops, Harry said. I'm going to do it in person, in his office, with my father's legal documents on his desk. He opened the taxi door. But first, lunch. Sirius laughed, a real one, unguarded, the laugh of a free man, and got back in the taxi, and Harry got in after him, and Hedwig flew off the wing mirror and found altitude, a white shape rising into the grey London sky. The taxi pulled back into traffic. The game had begun. The opening move had been made. And Harry Potter, 14 years old, son of James and Lily, godson of Sirius Black, the boy who had spent his childhood in a cupboard and his first week of a different life dismantling 13 years of careful management piece by piece, sat in a taxi in South London with a coin in his pocket and his mother's magic in his hands and looked at the city going past and felt, completely and without qualification, ready. Somewhere in Albania, something cold and ancient felt the broadcast reach the world like a hand placing pieces on a board, and understood, too late, as the best moves always land, that the opponent it had measured against a 15-month-old child was not the opponent it was facing. The real game started now.